Is
We're just waiting for Lori, otherwise everyone's here.
oh, okay. And Paul is here as well.
Yeah,
Oh, okay. Okay.
at least he
So
was.
and Begonia is with us as well. And so Gabriella, if you would like to start, I think we certainly have quorum, and we will have a break. This day scheduled at 11 o'clock Eastern time for about 15 minutes or so. So I'll pass to you, Gabriella,
Thank you
whenever you're
very
ready.
much, Jeff, and good morning, good afternoon, or good night, good evening to all of you, depending on where you are. Thank you for being back for the sixth day of the December board meeting, hopefully the last one. I'm happy to recall what the objective of this meeting is, and the objective of this meeting is to go through the last version of the proposals from the workstream one on independent standards for sustainability assurance, on which we had a discussion last week, on which there were some comments from the board members and some comments after the distribution of the text by Sylvia as well, which have been carefully addressed by the task force and triggered some changes, additional changes, as Mark and Sylvia will have the opportunity to guide you through. So the purpose of this meeting is to address these changes that were made since last week to the text that was presented to the initially to the December board meeting, and then hopefully to have a vote at the final of this meeting, at the end of this meeting, to approve not only the work of the proposals of workstream one, but the whole sustainability related project. I will remind you that last Tuesday, we fortunately had the opportunity to approve the first part, so to speak, which was the proposals of workstream two on sustainability reporting. And today we aim at approving, discussing and approving, if possible, the work from workstream one on independent standards for sustainability assurance, and the whole proposal for exposure draft. This is the purpose of this meeting. Again, as I have been saying last week and this week, the purpose is not to reopen any topics that have been addressed before and stabilized. So the objective of this meeting is to address the changes that were made to accommodate the discussions and the comments since last week. This is the objective of the meeting. I'd like also to recall that this is an important day for the ISBA as a standard setter. I would say a very important day. It's not the final of a long journey, but it's a date and a day and a moment that marks. It's a milestone. 1 year ago, there were a lot of doubts if we were going to be able to get here, but we made a decision that we were going to make it. And I will also recall what we have been highlighting since the very start of this discussion on sustainability related standards, is that this work has to be ready by the end of next year. We are the last ones in a trail of successive standard setting initiatives, but the fact that we are the last ones does not mean that we are the less important ones. On the contrary, you know what I think about it, and it's not because I'm the chair of the ISBA, but it's because I really think that the other standards, without the necessary behavioral baseline and framework, will be very ineffective and difficult to implement. This is like a building blocks structure with the reporting standards, assurance standards, ethics standards. We are one of the blocks, but the one without which the infrastructure will not be complete and will not be operable. So the deadline of 2024 to make sure that everything is ready for the moment where sustainability assurance is going to become mandatory, at least in Europe, but seeing many other countries following that example, is critical that we make the necessary steps. So I acknowledge also from some comments that were shared in between that some members may have still some concerns or considerations with respect of some of these proposals. We are not aiming for perfection. We weren't since the very first moment. This was something that we repeatedly said and agreed upon, that this was not going to be perfect on day one, but I'm sure that we will be able to deliver something within that very strict deadline, which is not only acceptable, but very robust. Now, perfection is going to be probably for another moment or never, because this is a very innovative space. Everything is very new, very unknown, very uncertain, and we all are doing our very best to make sure that what we will deliver by the end of next year is acceptable, is relevant, is necessary, and is of good quality. And with this, because we have 3 hours, now a little bit less than 3 hours ahead of us, but probably still some discussions to hold, I'm going to stop here. I'll just add that, of course, all the board members are urged to come in, and all the comments are very welcome and will be appreciated in a moment where we have to be sure that everybody understands what's happening here and what we are about to put forward for approval for this board. And with this, Mark, Sylvia, thank you very much for the excellent work done since the last board meeting, and even since, as far as I know, the text was distributed, and you made an effort, a big effort to accommodate, consider, reflect upon, and accommodate some of the comments that were received afterwards privately. So, Mark, please guide us through those changes very clearly, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Gabriella. I just really, as a sort of starter for 10, I'm very much sort of reminded of the discussion that we had back in Nashville some time ago, where James mentioned the importance of taking this project forward was to maximise our ability to flex and to pivot, because we learn a lot about sustainability as the project moves further forward. And therefore, the intention of the task force has always been to deliver a consultation draft that maximises that flexibility. So it includes things that may be amended, improved, removed, or whatever as a result of a consultation, in which we will get further valuable stakeholder feedback. I think it's also important to stress that, given the fact that this is a fast-moving and fast-changing area. And indeed, in our regular liaison with the IAASB, we know that as a result of their process, they have also identified very many things that perhaps weren't anticipated or expected at the start of their consultation process. You received earlier in the week a turnaround draft which reflected the feedback that board members provided us with following, in the board meeting and some of the comments that we subsequently received. Sylvia has processed those and they're all available within the turnaround draft that was sent out. I want to focus particularly on a small number of areas where there has been further conversation between the task force and board members as a way of trying to further refine the draft. So what we'll do is we'll focus on those subsequent changes initially, and then I'll open it up to board members to give feedback, but also raise any other comments about the draft, which Sylvia and I and Keith will endeavour to answer. I should say that because there has been an awful lot of conversation, particularly in the last sort of 12 hours, which has been updated in the draft after a fairly extensive overnight period of working. I also had the opportunity yesterday evening to have a discussion with one of the GPPC members about our aim to have a consultation that would maximise that flexibility. And I understand a note was sent round to all GPPC members emphasising the importance of that as a result of that conversation. So if you want to begin sharing your screen, Sylvia, what I want to start off is to go to section 5406. So you'll remember at the board meeting last week, I talked the board through the changes that the task force had made with 5406, 5407, 5405, 5406 and 5407. So 5406, we've had some further helpful feedback from board members that have allowed us to make some further changes. And those changes are highlighted in yellow on this document. So firstly, to clarify in the title of section 5406 that the section applies in both group and standalone engagements. So you'll see that change there. And in 5601, a clarification about the application of another practitioner that has moved from the application material in the subsequent paragraph to 5406.1. And that means, as a consequence, there's a deletion in 5406.2a1 to reflect that change. And of course, that reflects the fact that it relates to situations in which there is not direction, supervision, and review. In 5406.3a1, we've made a consistency change of changing engagement leader to firm to be consistent with the reference in 5406.3. So again, a consistency change. And then the most sort of significant thing that the task force discussed is that actually we've decided that all paragraphs in this section subsequent to 5406.5 are no longer required. And therefore we're proposing that those paragraphs will be deleted and that section 5406 will end at 5406.5. What we've also done in that same paragraph is changed the reference to an entity to a sustainability assurance client in line with the deletion of the rest of the paragraphs in that section. And that's intended to clarify the need to consider all relevant related entities, not only the entity at which the assurance work is performed. So those are the changes that we have made to 5406. And as I say, the most significant one is the deletion of those paragraphs subsequent to 5406.5. If we can go on, Sylvia, to section 5407, please.
Mark, sorry.
Yes, sorry,
is it
Luigi.
possible to have the time to read the text? Because the changes are not immaterial. I would like to read the text with let's say, with the possibility to have it. I don't know how to you would like to manage this, but I have not really understood all the changes.
What we'll do is we'll go back to that section, to 5406. But actually, Sylvia, can we email this document back round to board members and technical advisors on this call so they can have it on their screen as well, please?
Yes, of course, we can do that, Mark. Just give me one moment, maybe, if I will stop sharing for 2 seconds. And
sorry, you need, yes, because you've only got one screen there, haven't you?
Yes, just at the moment. So if that's okay for everybody, just
so we'll just pause for Sylvia to send that email round, and then we'll bring it back up on screen so you can read it as well, Luigi, and anyone else can too. Oh, Rich, you've got a hand up. Do you want to come in now while we're waiting for Sylvia to send the email?
Yeah, just real quick, Mark. As you delete everything after 5406.5, is that because you believe the other portions of 54, I'll say, the ones on financial interest, business relationships, etc., are sufficiently explanatory, or that you don't need to have these examples and things like that? I just want to, or are we going to, is there something else that you haven't got to yet that will help make this clear?
Other than, of course, we will need to make that clear within the explanatory memorandum that goes out with the text. But actually, after carefully sort of looking at this, we believe that there is enough in that section alone to support its application, which of course is only in respect of those those engagements where DSR isn't possible, and that will then be sufficient to support that. Sorry, Ken, is there anything you want to add to that? Oh, you either have vanished,
Yeah,
Ken,
you're muted.
Thank you.
or
Sorry,
you're muted.
there is a mute button for a reason. No, I wanted to provide some additional context, Mark, if I may, to board members. So Workstream 1 is proposing to drop the guidance, and some of the provisions are coming after 5406.5 for the reason that we are going to basically point practitioners to the application of the related entity provision that is in paragraph 5400.27. Because essentially the other practitioner is being asked to confirm independence in accordance with Part 5. And as they comply with Part 5, they will have to apply the related entity provision. And under the related entity provision, they are going to be required to be alert, or to, if they have any reason, if they have any reason to believe, or if they know of any relationship or circumstances that might impact their independence, they will take into consideration those relationships and circumstances. So all to say is that under the related entity provision, those relationships and circumstances will be captured already. And therefore, there is no need to have all the provisions that follow after 546.5. And of course, we can explain that in the explanatory memorandum and provide the examples of the types of circumstances or relationships we have in mind that basically all in the current draft that you saw, and which Workstream 1 is proposing to drop. So that is basically the context. In other words, it's already covered, we believe, under 5400.27.
I'm so sorry, Gabriela. I just wanted to know that I just pushed the send button so I circulated the document. It should be in your inbox shortly.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. But I see that Luigi and Rich still have considerations. Rich, please.
Sorry, I didn't take my hand down. My apologies. And thank you, Ken, for that explanation. Very helpful.
Thank you, Rich. Luigi.
Sorry, some technical issues. It is when you are speaking about related entities, are you speaking about related entities of the component? Because basically we are considering almost a component, this entity. So let me use this word. Are you considering the related entities of the components? When speaking about related entities, you are referring to related entities of the pie, if the group audit is a pie. Just to clarify, because in other discussion, I understood that when speaking about the entity, the other practitioner should work as, should be independent with respect to Part 5, but under the scheme applicable to the entity. So if the entity is not a pie, related entity should be those of a non-pie. Yes. But well, I've not read the text because I have not yet received it, but this is something that should be very clear in my view.
Yeah. Sylvia, if you don't mind putting the text up on the screen again, that would be helpful. Luigi, thank you for your comments. If you see the change that's been made here, Sylvia has essentially reverted back to referring to a sustainability assurance client. So in other words, a related entity provision would be applied with respect to the entity that is subject to assurance, and the work is being performed by the ANOVA practitioner. That said, there is a question as to whether, if the group is a pie, whether the pie rules should apply to the ANOVA practitioner, or whether the ANOVA practitioner ought to apply the independence provisions that apply at their level. In other words, at the level of the entity at which they are performing the assurance work. Now, that is a a question the board might wish to weigh in and see what is the appropriate approach that should apply. Workstream one's view, Mark, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the approach is to say if the group is a PI, it would make sense to apply the PI rules so that there is at least symmetry with respect to assurance work that is being performed at other entities within the same group. For firms that are under DSR, they would have to apply the PI rules, and their work will be equally subject to evaluation and review by the firm. And just also in the case of a firm that is not under direction, supervision, and review, their work will also need to be reviewed and evaluated by the firm, and therefore it would make sense to apply the same approach in respect of independence. So
and that's been the approach we followed, Ken.
Yep. Thank you, Mark.
Sorry, but by reading this part, I'm not able to understand this point, where it is written that they need to follow the rules applicable to the group audit. It is not written here.
Sylvia, can you go to the paragraph that deals with the communication of the application of the relevant ethical provisions? Can you go up to the requirement? Right. So that deals with the communication of the relevant ethical provisions. Okay, can you scroll back a bit so that we can see the entire paragraph, or maybe join the 2 pages? Yep. Okay, let's pause here and let's give board members a chance to read this paragraph, because that deals with the communication of the relevant ethical provisions that should apply at the level of another practitioner. One suggestion I might have, Mark, and I know that's not been subject to discussion within the workstream one, is if the board is agreeable that we apply the PI rules when the group is a PI, to make clear in the, let's say in the 4th line, where it says the independence provisions in this part that are applicable given the nature and the circumstances, etc., to say independence provisions in this part that are applicable to the group assurance client, given the nature and the circumstances of the sustainability assurance engagement. And that would make clear that the independence provisions that apply are those that apply to the group assurance client or group sustainability assurance client.
And that would seem to be a helpful clarification.
And the first bullet of the guidance in 5406.3A1 then dovetails quite nicely with that clarification, because the first bullet indeed is about communicating whether the sustainability assurance client is a PI or not.
Okay, thank you very much, Ken. Luigi, does this respond to your question?
I had another question, which is more general. By comparing, for the sake of equivalence principle, I new new sections that we have, and why we should, well, because this is not clear to me, why we should have a section 406 here, which is not included in the group audit. There are no substantial differences. Even in the group audit, we could have auditor of components or part of the group that are not under DSR, and we do not have this section. So why we feel the need to have this additional section here?
Well, part of the rationale for it, Luigi, was to try and make the sections of the code less complex, because if we what we were concerned about is where we had it all bought within one section, it became quite long and quite confusing, particularly for non-PAs that might use it. And so therefore this was a way of trying to segment it down and make it more manageable.
But yeah, but this is not included into the long 405 of the audit of the extant code. Extant because today is is effective. So I do not understand why this difference, because this is something new which is not included in the extant code, so it is not equivalent to the extant code. And I struggle to understand why it is needed, why the circumstances could be the same of the financial statement audit. And in this scenario, we didn't feel the need to have it.
Ken, please.
May I?
No, sorry, Sylvia. I was seeing Ken's hand.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Gabriele. And I'll give a quick response to Luigi. Luigi, the simple reason is because this section is being driven by the provisions in draft ISSA 5000. So as indicated at the board last week, this section is not being created by IESPA just for the sake of addressing the use of another practitioner. The concept of using the work of another practitioner who is not under direction, supervision, and review is a new concept in draft ISSA 5000. It is not a concept that is in ISA 600 as it applies to group audits. And the group audits, it's always about using the work of a component auditor or a component auditor firm that is under direction, supervision, and review. So that is a difference, and that's why we have a separate section, which for the sake of clarity, as Mark indicated, it's best to address that concept of another practitioner separately when there's no direction, supervision, and review.
Yeah, Ken, I understand what you're saying. I do not find a reason why I can live with that, just to clarify. I do not find any good reason to have an additional section to deal with circumstances that could also exist in the financial statement audit if we need to apply the equivalence principle. Having said that, I would not object having it, but I don't find a very good reason to have it, frankly. So it is really strange that we include a new section. We invoke the equivalence between the two. We have potentially the same situation. In one case, the extant code, we did not have anything, and here we are introducing a new section. This would not be the reason of my disagreement, just to clarify, but it is really strange. So I think that the task force should do their major effort to explain why we are applying something different when we are invoking equivalence, and there are similar situations in both scenarios, because it is really strange to understand. And an additional comment, I think that statement should be changed. When we say provision that apply to a sustainability client, probably we should say provision that apply to the sustainability engagement. Isn't it the engagement that trigger the provision and not the client?
Sorry, Luigi, which paragraph are you referring to now?
There is, if you go, probably it is below. Here, with respect to a sustainability assurance client, Isn't it to the sustainability assurance engagement?
Go ahead, Sylvia. Do you want to respond to Luigi?
Yeah, I believe the client is appropriate here, because whether the client or whether the firm should use the PI rules or the non-PI rules, that will depend on the client and not on the engagement.
That is the formulation we use in Section 405, Luigi, in relation to group audits. It is the application of the independence provisions with respect to a client. Part 4 is about the independence provisions as they apply to with respect to a client. So that is consistent with Section 405 in group audits.
Yeah, I will try to read the entire text during the break.
Thank
It
you.
is now much shorter. It is now much shorter, Luigi, as Mark has explained, and hopefully much clearer.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Gavin, please.
Yeah, to Luigi's point, we've already raised some questions about the references to audit client, and to look at that later. I think it might have some merit to consider sustainability assurance engagement, or some other term, because we're kind of setting this up to be looked at in the future when we look at the audit client term. Thank you.
Again, sorry, I must jump in here. We are in danger of introducing inconsistencies with how we are directing practitioners to apply the independence provisions. The provisions that apply in the group audit context refer to the application of Part 4A with respect to an audit client. And that means that when you apply the provisions in Part 4A, you have to apply it with the understanding as to how an audit client is defined. An audit client is not defined just in relation to the entity subject to audit, but it is encompasses the related entities as defined under the code, under the glossary. So we have to be consistent because otherwise it's going to be very difficult to explain why we have a difference in terms of the approach.
Okay, thank you, Ken. I think that that explains why the use of this language here. And I think that Mark can proceed.
Okay, thank you. If we can move forward, Sylvia, please, to 5407, just so I can take the board through the changes to that section as a result of the further discussions since the version was sent round. So there's just an editorial change. Sorry, Sylvia?
Apologies, Mark, just before because I realized that even though you mentioned that we suggest to delete all the paragraphs after 5406.5, the version I circulated to the board, I just wanted to point out that those paragraphs are not deleted at the moment, because we didn't plan to circulate it, and indeed deleting all these paragraphs would look a bit messy on the screen. So I just want to reiterate that what you said before, that all the paragraphs after 5406.5 would be deleted, even though in the document that I have just circulated, you couldn't see that.
Sorry, it is resulting a bit confusing for me. Well, it is my problem. Following the discussion in this way, I wonder whether we can go on and you could explain what are the changes with respect to what it was circulated. But then I would ask to receive a complete and final version, and to have the time to read it and to be ready to attend the discussion. So elsewhere would be pretty impossible for me to follow.
Begonia, please.
Thank you, Gabriela. Well, before we go to 507 on the value chain, I would like to understand better, we would like to understand better which is the role, the activities of this another practitioner that, well, does some activities under 5406. It's not a component auditor, it's not in the value chain. So which is this another practitioner that, by the way, sometimes is also referred as other practitioner, or use other and another in some places, and it's not clear. I mean, if I've tried to translate that into Spanish, it's impossible because it's the same word. So I understand the another, but the other I don't understand. But my question is, which is the role of this another practitioner in the assurance of sustainability reporting?
This Begonia hasn't changed from what we discussed previously.
Yeah, I know, but I had that question also the other day. In principle, we understood that another practitioner was meant to be the one that does the value chain.
No, not in the context of the value chain. Because we changed the sections. 5406, 5405 is applying within the engagement where the auditor has the ability to carry out direction, supervision, and review. 5406 applies where you've got another practitioner whose work you intend to use in support of your sustainability engagement, but you do not have the ability to direct, supervise, and review that work. So it could be the auditor of a component within the group where you don't have the ability for a reason to carry out direction, supervision, or review.
Oh, see. Okay, so the components are covered in the two sections, depending on if they are, if the engagement leader can or not to, in a way, to direct their activities. Is that the case?
That's right. So it's split between those sections.
Okay.
So it's very, we've tried to be really clear that where you've got direction, supervision, and review, it's 5405. Where you don't, it's 5406. And then, of course, 5407 is there completely separately to deal with only the value chain, not components within the engagement.
Okay. So, and then this is a minor thing, it's a language thing, but you use sometimes another practitioner, which is clear, but sometimes you talk about also the other practitioner in 5400, 5406, and some others. So I wonder how you are going to translate that into Spanish or Italian, because the two words are equal. That's all. Thank you.
Well, that's something we'll take away and flag as something that we need
keep
to
that
resolve.
in mind. Keep that in mind. What do you mean by other practitioner?
Yeah. No, we understood. Sylvia, do you want to come in response to Begonia?
Just really briefly to clarify, sometimes we refer to other practitioner within the same provision when we already introduced the reference to another practitioner. It is only grammatical because sometimes we cannot use a definite article and another practitioner. But I think it's supposed to be clear because other practitioner comes second all the time. So if someone reads the whole provision together, it is clear that we are talking about another practitioner that is a defined term in the glossary.
Well, frankly, I find it confusing. And by the way, and the difference between the another or other practitioner and other firm?
Yes, so Begonia, the concept of another practitioner is an assurance concept. It sits in ISA 5000. And this is a matter that we may want to continue coordinating with ISSB because clearly it is very awkward in drafting to write a proper sentence when you have to refer to another practitioner more than one time. So the language is what it is, and therefore that's why we have to read it in context. When the context is, in this section, it is about using the work of another practitioner. The context is another practitioner, and therefore references to other practitioner are intended to be read in the context of basically that concept of another practitioner. We can again flag this issue on exposure and indicate that this is a matter that we are aware of, and we will continue to explore in collaboration, coordination with ISSB, where there's another term that would be more clearer and perhaps less confusing to use by practitioners and others. But that is a matter that certainly has existed all along. the moment IWSB came up with the concept of another practitioner.
And do you have difference between other practitioner and other firm?
Well, I'm not sure whether in this section we refer to another firm, Sylvia. I don't believe so.
Well, other firm is used in 5400, but then so I mean, I'm reading the code as an external person that tries to understand it, right?
Yes.
And in order to make it clear for the non-PAs, well, these things could be a bit difficult to follow, but that's it. I mean, I'm not saying if they're important or relevant things, but it would improve to have more clarity in the reading if this is the plan to make the code accessible to the others. Thank you. That's
understood. Okay, so we can explain this again. Just flag this in the explanatory memorandum, Sylvia. Just highlighting again that these terms have to be read in context and the relevant sections. And that we will continue to coordinate with IWSB in terms of identifying whether there's a better term or clearer term that could be used. Before you move on, Mark, just in response to Luigi's suggestion of having a clean draft, what I would suggest is just before we come to the break, and hopefully we'll be able to get through the substantive comments, Mark, I'd ask Sylvia to maybe extract the relevant sections under discussion and just send a clean version out to the board so that during the break we'll allow some time for the board to read the clean versions.
Okay, thanks, Ken.
May I suggest, sorry for jumping, may I suggest to receive the clean compare, let's say the markup compare with what those that you have circulated would be easier for, at least for me to go through and even faster.
I will try to do my best, Luigi, during the break. I don't have those versions because whatever I circulated to you, the green changes that it was explained previously, this is the changes since the posted version. The yellow changes that Mark is walking us through, this is the changes that we have made since I circulated the latest version on Wednesday. And I recognize that we haven't deleted those paragraphs that Mark referred to. The only reason we didn't do that because we considered when sharing the screen, maybe that would look a bit messy. But this is the only change that you cannot see currently in that version that is in front of you. But I will do my best to see how can I address that point during the break.
Yeah.
And, thank you. Sorry, Gabriela.
Go ahead.
No, it would be very. I'm speaking for me. I have the need to read the document in a form that it is stable before understanding whether still I have issues or not before voting, because elsewhere it would be very difficult for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Luigi. We'll do, and the staff will do what is possible in these circumstances. Yeah, Sylvia will do what is possible, and if possible, depending on the speed of the discussion from now on, we may extend the break for 5 minutes or something, or 10, if possible, to allow for more careful reading, but without any promise, because it will depend on the pace of the discussion. Paul, please.
Thanks so much, Gabriel. I think, if anything, just touching on the points being flagged by Begonia in terms of how to progress towards the code being as accessible as possible by non-practitioners, just kind of flagging a question, because IESBA is taking steps towards profession agnostic, which IAASB are not in the same direction on. If we're trying to make sure that any changes are done in very tight cohesion with the IAASB, will we achieve that goal of code accessibility to non-practitioners? Just a question I'm flagging. We can go into more detail. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. Well, I'll try to respond afterwards, but let's listen to Hector.
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, just to, if I understood correctly, Sylvia, if we take the last version that you circulated and we delete everything between 5406.582 and the rest of that section, then we will have a final version. Is that correct?
That's correct, Hector. And I think I have just managed to send it to everyone with those paragraphs deleted.
Excellent.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Hector, for clarifying that, and Mark for sending that. Paul, yes, I think that you have a point there, but this is the tension that we are always facing between trying to be as profession agnostic as possible, but still having to abide by and be consistent with technical terms that it's not in our hands to change. So this is really a difficulty that I think that we will have to address going forward on the next years together with ISSB. But it's also from an enforcement perspective, it's very risky to use different terminology from the one that is in the assurance framework. So yes, you have a point there, but there are limits to what we can do with the IESBA in terms of working on that concepts, which are not our concepts, and making them available. I fully understand what you're saying and agree and can agree somehow on that, but this is about the limits of the circumstances and the context where we work. We are not the owners of the technical terms, so changing them would take, as you say, a very careful work with ISSB that for the time being, it's not yet possible, also because our time frames were different. So this is probably something that we will have to address going forward if we want to explore further the idea of being profession agnostic together with ISSB. Thank you for your comment. I don't see anyone else. So Mark, can you please move forward?
So thank you. If we go on, Sylvia, to 5407, there are a small number of clarifications and changes. So in 5407.1, you'll see a reference has been added to assurance work to avoid confusion there. In 5407.2, paragraph A1, there's a clarification to over the description of work performed by the firm at a value chain entity. We've also inserted a subtitle before 5407.4, which you'll see there. And at 5705, clarification that the assurance work was performed in relation to the value chain entity. So those are just small changes to section 5407.
Mark, sorry if I can jump in here. I think the subheading, unless I need to have a vision check here, I think the word practitioner has been deleted, and I think Sylvia, you intended
that's right. It is struck out on the.
Yes. So Sylvia, if you can undelete practitioner so that it makes sense.
Apologies for that. Indeed, we just only changed the reference from another practitioner to a sustainability assurance practitioner. A minor clarification.
Yeah, okay. Okay, Sylvia. The next one I want to go to is 5600.4, please. Again, this is just a minor change that we have made.
So, sorry, I see Rich's hand up. Rich, did you intend to come in on 5700? Sorry, 547?
5407.
Rich?
Yes. And this is, most of my comments are about, oops, your screen's pretty blurry, but I'll put it this way. This is a challenging section to read. So when we use the phrase perform assurance work, we mean performing assurance procedures at the value chain entity. We use that in the very beginning in 5702A1A. Okay.
Yep.
so then I just want to clarify if I'm reading 54073 correctly, we're saying that if you are the standalone sustainability assurance provider or the group sustainability assurance provider, and you choose to go with your own team to do work at a value chain entity, you must be fully independent of that value chain entity in accordance with Part 5. I think that's pretty clear what that's what it says.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. That's going to be something we should explain in the EM, because I have to admit I had to go through this a couple of times to kind of separate what happens when A applies in 54072A1 subparagraph A versus subparagraph B. That is going to be one of these places where that's not likely to be, is likely to result in people being unable to do that work. But that's just the function of what we've created, I guess. And then as we move to this is not a huge, 54075 in the first paragraph, the lead-in paragraph, the value chain entity is just not mentioned, and I would suggest that it should. I see you've added it in the yellow. Thank you. Sorry, I missed that in the walkthrough. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Andy, you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. If we're talking about the 5407, or unless we're going to ask for comments later.
No, please, Andy.
Yeah, and some of this dealt with, thank you very much. Some of this dealt with, I think, some of the topics that were touched on just now by Rich with the phrase assurance work, which I am struggling over because I understand what performing procedures for purpose, auditing procedures or assurance procedures for purposes of an engagement are, but assurance work is very generic. And my concerns deal with how it's handled in point 1 and then point 2. So, for example, 5407.2A1 B says the firm might use the work of a sustainability assurance practitioner who separately performs the assurance work at the value chain entity. And then using the work seems to be, when you work it through, looks like it's on point 1 is that it's using the work of another assurance practitioner. Looks like it's defined as assurance work when you get past point 1. So my concern is that an auditor, an assurance provider, looking at evidence, might turn towards other entities' financial statements or financial reports and use that as evidence as they see fit in their audit engagement, their assurance engagement. I don't see that as I see that as using evidence. I don't see that as performing procedures at that entity. So I'm concerned that the scope of how this is constructed is that if a practitioner refers to a report that happens to have an assurance report attached to it, that somehow creates a definition that under the audit that they're doing an auditing procedure at that entity, as opposed to doing an auditing procedure at their. Excuse me. I mean, it's just we've got too many entities here. It's hard to visualize at the client. The reporting entity that is concerned with, and it's just invoking evidence. So the short is that I'm concerned that assurance work is not specific enough. I think it's a novel phrase that's being introduced in this paper, and we discussed at the meeting phrases such as performing procedures at an entity, and I'm still trying to take this on board, but that's my major concern, that we're creating a definition of what a procedure is that I don't think is in practice or practicable.
And like obviously very happy to consider that, Andy, but I think ISSA 5000 also uses this term of assurance work. So I think we've to the extent that I would say that we've fallen into it in trying to align with the IAASB.
No, I understand that, but and this is where I wasn't effective in explaining it, is I believe we're also invoking using this report of another practitioner as assurance work on the audit that we're concerned about. And I don't think that's how it's defined in the auditing procedures in the 5000. So that was my concern.
Thank you, Andy. Luigi, please.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm struggling to understand the same issue under another perspective, because in point A, which is on screen now, we say perform the assurance work on the sustainability information of the value chain, which is one thing. In point 3, you are saying another thing, which is perform assurance work at the value chain entity, which is completely a different meaning. So I'm really confused of what scenario you are trying to point. Let's put the matter in this way. You may have 3 scenarios. First scenario, you use, the sustainability assurance practitioner may decide to use the work of another practitioner. And this is a scenario, point B, letter B here, and requirement afterwards. Then you have another scenario. You obtain the permission to go to the value chain entity, require information to the value chain entity, perform assurance procedure at the value chain entity, and then, let's say, form your opinion on that. And this, I don't know whether it is A or something else. And maybe this could fit with point 3. But then you have also a situation where you do not go at the value chain entity, you stay at your client, you obtain evidence by your client, and the evidence are those information and evidence they collected in order to decide whether to include this information in their sustainability information, and you perform whatever you would like to do in terms of assurance work on these evidence, and you are satisfied in this way. In this case, the third scenario, I'm not able to find here this third scenario, and frankly, I don't think point 3 is applicable in this case, because you have nothing to do with the value chain entity. You are only performing an audit or assurance process on your client, on your sustainability assurance client, on your sustainability assurance client process. So there is no reason why we should be independent with respect to the value chain entity. So point 3 should not be applicable in this case, but it is not written, it is confused, and it is pretty obscure in my view.
Luigi, when you refer to point 3, I'm just trying to understand which point 3. Is this your third scenario that you mentioned?
Or is this
407.3? 407.3 should correspond to letter A, but it is not. It is, well, letter A and point 3 are completely inconsistent under a writing perspective. And I don't know in which scenario we should apply them, because no one of us know so far how the assurance process on value chain information should be conducted, because it is not defined yet, neither in the ISA 5000 nor in other documents. So we are guessing that there could be 3 scenarios. Here I'm reading just 2 scenarios and not the third one. And I want to be sure that the provision in 407.3 should not be applicable in case we stay at the sustainability assurance client, obtain evidence from them. We stay there, we do not interact at all with the value chain entity. So there is no reason that the sustainability assurance practitioner should be independent from the value chain entity.
Ken, did you want to jump back in? Ken, did you want to jump
Yes,
in?
thank you. And I'll jump in very quickly. I think, Luigi, I think that's a valid point. And Mark, I would suggest we align the wording of 5407.3 with bullet A.
Yeah.
And my sense is we ought to align with the wording as it is in bullet A.
Yeah. No, that's
because that is assurance work on the information as opposed to necessarily a full and complete assurance of the value chain entity.
Yeah, but it should be clarified which scenario is, because if it is also implying that if we stay at the sustainability assurance client, and for the fact that we are examining their evidence to take assurance on this information, this would result in the sustainability assurance practitioner to be independent, fully independent with respect to the value chain entity. I'm not in agreement. I'm strongly in disagreement.
No, I think I understand your point, Luigi. And this is a bit of an unknown at this point, because as you say, we don't know how the assurance work is going to be performed under ISA 5000. ISA 5000 is silent on this at the moment. And this is a matter that perhaps we can ask for input on exposure. But at the moment...
I don't think so. No, sorry, Ken. Sorry. We cannot apply independence rule to the unknown and therefore wait for the other to say what we need to do. I think that we should have our view on the three scenario. Some one of us could be in agreement or not, but I don't think that we should inquire the stakeholders to dictate what we need to do. We need to take a position. And frankly, if we are not interacting with the value chain entity, why we should be independent with respect to the value chain entity? We are dealing, as we are now dealing, with the financial statement audit. We obtain evidence from the audit client, we perform the audit on this information and evidence, and we are not interacting with the client. So we don't need to be independent from the clients, even though they are producing information that are in fact incorporated into the financial statement. So frankly, leaving it undetermined as it is now, it is not in the public interest, and frankly, it is not a very good service for the stakeholders.
I think the concern is, Luigi, that if we don't have something in as a basis for consultation, then it leaves us in a situation where we're unable to respond when the IAASB finalises what it does, which I understand it's currently in the process of doing, without a further exposure. So this gives us the flexibility to be able to put something out, seek stakeholder views, and then return with a final version that reflects that views and also where the assurance standard has moved on to.
Yeah, but what you are writing now in point 3 is wrong. It is not acceptable simply because it is wrong. If you mutuate and apply this concept to the financial statement audit, you should be consistent and therefore say that the financial statement auditor need to be independent from all the suppliers, from all the clients, from all the banks. Is it reasonable? I don't think so. And why we should apply it here? It is wrong.
Thanks, Luigi. I don't know if Mark or Ken want to respond to that before we pass it to Laurie for a comment.
Well, I think the view of the work stream is that we should use this as the basis for consultation to elicit feedback. We may not all agree with the position that's there, but it does form the basis of us getting feedback, and it gives us the basis to finalise this later on when we have the benefit of that insight, and also we know where the IAASB has landed. So that is where we got to. I suppose the other thing to make clear, and we'd have to make this clear in the consultation. If you're not interacting with the value chain, it's not an issue. But if you are interacting with the value chain in a way that a third party would see that your independence is undermined, it becomes an issue, and that's what we need to try and cover off for.
Why you are not writing in this way? You are right in that if you perform audit assurance work on sustainability information of the value chain entity, even though you do not interact with them, we should be independent, fully independent. It is not what you are saying. Yeah. It is inconsistent.
Ken.
Yeah, I thought Luigi, paragraph 3 precisely gets to this point. Yeah. That the firm should apply part 5. Because at the end of the day, the firm is the one that is performing the assurance work on the value chain's information. So I'm not sure why you're seeing a bit of an inconsistency here, because at the end of the day, we're saying the firm needs to apply part 5. This is assurance work the firm is carrying out on the information.
It is inconsistent because if you are developing your assurance process at your sustainability assurance client without involving the value chain entities, and therefore you obtain the information that your client obtained, you obtain information and evidence about the process they implemented in order to incorporate this information in their information. You obtain all sort of evidence you need and you are satisfied. You need to be independent from your client, not from the value chain entity. If you apply this principle, you need to completely change the extant code relating to the audit of the financial statement because it is the same process. Instead, when someone decides to go at the value chain entity and interact directly with the value chain entity, I agree that it is a different story. But here, you are stating a different thing. Here, you are stating that if there is a value chain entity, which is value chain entity for 1,000 of users, each of the assurance service provider of this user need to be independent from this value chain entity, even though they do not have any interaction with the value chain entity. Is it really reasonable? I don't think so. It is a nightmare. It is a mess.
It takes us back to the point that we discussed last week, Luigi, which is the reporting in the value chain is firstly only in respect of material entities. So it wouldn't be your 1,000 entities scenario. And under the reporting frameworks that we've got, financial statements don't present value chain information in the way that's proposed for sustainability reporting. So, you know, and unless you were sort of going through issuing some sort of questionnaire, you wouldn't be able to address that. So that's what's driven it. It's effectively, you know, it is aligned with the reporting framework and the way that the sustainability information is brought in, which is very different to an audit of financial statements.
Yeah, Mark, but you are continually repeating that you are making reference to the reporting framework, but the point is that you should make reference to the assurance framework, to the performance of the assurance, not the reporting. Until when we don't know how to perform this activity, we don't know how to state independence. But if we would like to state independence, I don't think we should state as large as possible. We should state on the basis of the possible scenario. The scenario are 3 or more than 3, but at least 3. And here I see only 2 independence rules. And the second one is too broader. It is not working. If you exit with this statement, well, it is simply wrong. And you will receive a number of comment letters that says it is wrong. You have not understood anything about how a sustainability assurance is to be done.
Laurie, I can see a hand.
I'm not gonna add clarity to this point. I my hand went up before Luigi spoke. I was sort of echoing both Rich and Andy's points, sort of separately. Mark, I had a communication with you that was somewhat less clear than the way Andy articulated it, but that was basically my concern. And I think Luigi has actually fleshed that out further than what I thought about. And I guess when I back up, this section is, and by the way, I'm going to give credit where credit is due. Improvements were made last week, and I think everybody appreciates the task force moving to get some of that in there. I know we're not aiming for perfection, but I think the concern everybody has here is, how does this change post-exposure if it's viewed as a significant change? I'm not sure how the IAASB is going to get these big changes through post-exposure when things weren't included in a due process way. It's not my problem to worry about, obviously, but that's a huge question mark. I certainly wouldn't want us to be in the same position. And I think what I'm hearing is just concern around some of the wording in the section. And is this a little too broad? I happen to agree with that. I'm struggling a little with how to articulate it differently.
I suppose it just comes back to this point, which is that we are where we are because of the framework that we have. So we are being driven by a reporting framework and reporting requirements. That will determine ultimately what's assured, although that is not set out in the assurance standard yet. And as you say, I don't know how the IAASB will land this, but that's what they're working on at the moment, and they tell us they're working on at the moment. And we should make sure that the independence requirements are sufficient to underpin that assurance engagement. And this gives us a basis to go and consult, get that feedback, and subsequently amend this if we need to. But if we don't have it, we've got no basis to do that.
Thank you, Mark. Andy.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to let you guys know that I think Luigi actually captured many of the essence of what I was trying to say much more articulately. So I should have not had my hand go up as quickly. So I am concerned that the 5407 is expanding the independence umbrella far beyond that of what would be analogous in a financial statement framework. The reporting framework we're dealing with now in S2, and it comes with value chain entities, has a whole array that the reporting entity is disclosing in terms of the verifiability of its information and where it comes from. And those are the assertions upon which the assurance provider needs to provide assurance of. And in doing so, they get evidence, and that's essentially where we're dealing with. And I think Luigi did express that much differently than I did, and much more articulately. But I mean, in a financial statement audit, everything on that financial statement is a counterparty for the most part with other entities, and the auditor gets evidence that it weighs in a variety of fashions. And its independence must be independent of the reporting entity. And I think I certainly agree that's unassailable. My concern is that as written here, I think it limits things and goes beyond. So I'll tick off what Luigi said there. In terms of the consultation, I'm just not comfortable with putting something out for consultation that I think is flawed. So I do hear what you're saying about it. So I would prefer a different avenue to go by and to be able to make sure that we could deliver the appropriate independent standard to hit most of the circumstances. But anyway, Luigi did articulate precisely my point in a much more clear fashion. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Christelle.
Thank you. While I support and understand what Luigi is referring to, I wonder if when we read the 4072A1, we are not excluding this third scenario, because this section says the sustainability information on which a firm expresses an opinion might include information from a value chain entity. This is the first might. Then in performing the sustainability assurance engagement in accordance with the relevant, etc., the firm might determine that assurance procedure need to be performed at the value chain entity. Okay? If you are not at the value chain entity, but only on the subject matter information coming from that value chain entity, but performed and the assurance provisions are performed at the client, which is the third scenario of Luigi. For me, you're not in this A1 section. You're somewhere else. Maybe we need to say that this somewhere else should be dealt in accordance with such and such provision, but effectively we should not suggest that if the subject matter information on which you perform assurance work is done without any relation with this value chain entity, you should be independent of this entity. This, I think the scope, I am okay with what Luigi is saying. I don't see a contradiction with what is written here. I just wonder, is there a necessity to have an additional mention somewhere else? I don't know. But I would not wait for the ED to answer to change this chapter, because the A1 here seems to me quite bulletproof. Yeah. If the introduction of that section is coherent with the A and B. This is what I mean. Sorry.
And that is, you know, Christelle, we from a work stream perspective, we agree with you. And of course, you know, the point A, of course, only addresses where actual work is being carried out. So, you know, we agree with your assessment there. And that's been the understanding that we've had.
Okay. If it's at the value chain entity, it can be by you or by another practitioner. But if it's on the value chain entity information, computed, worked out by your client, then the independence should be to the client, not to the value chain entity. This is and if we understand this way, the question is now, should it be said so straightforward, or should we include this as a comment in the ED that this is our understanding, and because the subject matter information on which assurance work is done on leads to analyzing the independence to the reporting entity, so the assurance client, then this is addressed by other chapters of our part 5, which is the normal all other information on which classic assurance work is done. You see what I mean? And we shouldn't have to change right away, but just to make sure that there is no confusion between the subject matter information and the relation with the entity, with the value chain entity.
Yeah. Luigi, I don't know if, Christian, thank you. That's very helpful. Luigi, I don't know if that would help you if it were to approach it the way.
No, I like the reading of Christelle, frankly. Unfortunately, it is not what it is written here. And it is not what Mark said before. So if the reading... No, if the reading of Christelle is the right one, I agree with Christelle.
Yeah, I would agree.
But then I would need to have a consistent wording, and probably A, B, and C where C is when we perform an assurance work by using the evidence provided by the client, or in any case, we are not going at the value chain entity. And this is very clear. What does it mean? If it is written in a clear way, in a very consistent way, and it is according with the interpretation of Clistel, I'm fine.
Yeah, I think we can get there. I don't know, Mark, if you have any reaction to what Clistel has articulated.
We can look at that, Ken. I'm just I'm just mindful of the fact that we don't want to land ourselves in a place where what we're proposing is incompatible with the primary assurance standard that's been developed to deal with this.
Well,
but there is no assurance standard developed, so
yeah.
Well,
we don't know.
There is one under development.
Yes. What is a risk, Mark? For example, if the IAASB issues a complement to say, okay, this is how to deal with the assurance work on value chain information. If they say that there is a way to deal with this information on the basis of what your client has prepared, on site of the client with no relation with the value entity, if this is one of the acceptable paths, then we would have written something on that. If it is forbidden, then we should ask ourselves, could it be authorized by other frameworks, assurance frameworks, right? And so it's still interesting to leave our message, or should we revise because the arguments about assurance work is such that it will never happen, and then we don't need to keep this mention. Yeah. So I understand what you say about we don't have the assurance framework, but we don't have it neither on the A and B. Yeah. We guess it's logical that it exists. There might be situations where the C could exist, I don't know, or if we set it as a A1 like that, somewhere we could have an A2 or an A3. By the way, if the work is performed on the basis of the client's information and the independence requirement is not applicable.
Yeah.
This would be the C, yes, if I understand, which I agree in terms of scope of independence.
Laurie.
Yeah, I actually, that's interesting because as I read this, that I think Clistel's point is very good. It sort of focuses on the language right now, the work on the sustainability information of the value chain for purposes of sustainability assurance engagement incorporates too much. It incorporates, work you're doing on evidence your client has given you. And we have lots of different pieces of evidence that come from lots of different places that the client provides, and that work needs to be done. And we don't look at independence. It seems to me where we're not capturing that you did work at the value chain entity with a relationship there. And that's a separate concept. And I think we need to split these because otherwise we get into this very murky area. When do you cross the line? And I would be comfortable if we figure out a language around that, because that splits out, hey, we don't have anything to do with this entity. It could be, as Luigi has mentioned, an entity that's providing a piece of work to lots of different people. And that is commonly the case. And there's all kinds of audit work you can do up at the client level of the group. So I'm supportive of trying to get that language fixed. I would feel much more comfortable with that.
Okay, thank you, Laurie. Mark or Ken, I just want to check, is the work stream proposing any further changes before we move further?
Yeah, my sense is it's achievable to cover that third scenario Mark, if that's okay with you. I mean, I've got some wording in mind already that we can just slot in. But to me,
okay, well, maybe we can discuss that in the break, Ken,
Yeah.
and come back to the board after the break on that point if there is wording to do it.
Yeah.
Although, do note that 5406 uses at, 5700 covers on, you know, and in a pretty light touch way. So we've got to make sure that we're not leaving a gap, but we can discuss that in the break.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you both. Just want to confirm that Sally and Rich, you don't want to come in. Rich, you okay. Okay, thank you. Mark, back to you.
So some further small items. Sylvia, if we go on to 5600, so we can go to 5605.4. This is just a minor deletion to align the language, so the deletion of the word used. Five, 5605. Thank you. So you'll see that deletion of the word used, which is a very minor change. And then the other area of change that followed our discussions last night, which I'll just cover off, is in section 5700. And again, the intention of the work stream was to have 5700 as the basis to consult on to see what we need to actually do. And again, that is something that could be subject to revision as appropriate on the back of the consultation. So if we go first to 5700.2, we've clarified that this section applies when the firm's using the work of another practitioner. On 5703A1, we've changed information regarding value chain entities to information from value chain entities to be consistent with the rest of the section. There's a subtitle that's been added before 5708A1, which changes an entity within the value chain to value chain entity, and this is consistent with everything through part 5. And then a subtitle in 5709A1 to add interests to again align with the wording elsewhere. Now, those are the changes that have been made in respect of the independence parts. We've made other adjustments in respect of changes to the engagement team definition in the glossary to align with the changes that we've already used, and to also correct a reference to direction, supervision and review and better align it to ISSA 5000. And we've also corrected a couple of editorial errors in respect of sustainability assurance client in the glossary. And that has then, thank you, Sylvia, and that has then meant one change to the consequential and conforming amendments in 900.1, which was to use the same language as we use in the title of the section and the leading sentence. So that's just conforming that. So those are the changes that have been made as a result of the discussions that we had really in the last 12 to 18 hours or so. I don't know, Jens, Channa, is there anything that you want to add from your perspective as the...
Mark, there seems to be, I think Sylvia's put up the next document for the consequential amendments.
Oh, sorry, yes, but that's just one, that's just the one amendment. And it is just alignment with the other wording that we've used. But I was just going to sort of pause now and ask Channa and Jens if they want to add anything.
Not for me. I think the proposed changes responding to Luigi's comments, I think to add a small c is in line with our discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, Mark, nothing to add from me. I also agree with Jens. If we can address that point C, I think then we can move forward. So nothing more to add at this stage.
So in that case, Gabriela, what I might suggest is, I know that you said there would be a break slightly later on, but what I might suggest is that we pause now to allow us to just convene to see if we can do that wording for C, and then show that back to the board after the break.
I also ask because it is, sorry, Mark, but it is very difficult for me, and sorry for that. Probably it is due to me, but I need to have a stable text, and I also need to have some time sufficient for me to go through it and to connect all my dots in mind, in order to be sure that when we are discussing something, I have the full picture in front of me. I have a number of comments though to be provided. I can wait the final release, but after your dissemination, I need some time in order to review it and to read and to be ready for the discussion.
So the version, I was going to say, the version that I emailed out earlier, Luigi, is a stable version with the exception of any new text that we need for this bullet C. So that version has the deleted paragraphs now removed from 5606. Yes. And we need to just deal with the other question in the break to revert back to the board. Sorry.
What I was going to suggest was exactly that we have a slightly larger break, longer break, maybe half an hour, because we were supposed to break, I think, in half an hour, that we can reconvene in half an hour. Or if you think it's fine to do what everybody has to do, and then reconvene and discuss with a view to have a final decision. And at this stage, I see that Rich and Angie still want to speak, but I'd like again to urge the other board members, if possible, to tell us what you think about this proposal. And at this stage, before we break, I'd like to remind you that we have agreed on the principles, on the basic and fundamental principles behind this proposal. I welcome all this incredible work that has been done by some of you in addressing the proposal in such a level of detail. I understand that there may be some remaining concerns, and this is more than understandable with such a complex issue and proposal. So there is nothing strange here in this room and at this moment. What I think that we have to focus on is on the general agreement that we have already made on the principles behind the proposals. Now, if we can still adjust the proposal in terms of making the words better, in excluding or mitigating some lack of clarity, eliminating some conflicts between words or whatever, of course, this is going to be in the interest of the exposure draft and in the interest of the ESMA. But what is in the interest of as always, that in the last part of the meeting after the break, that we are able to focus on what's really strategic and significant to allow the board to make a decision and take a vote and decide whether this is an exposure draft that we want to put out or not. Reminding, of course, and again, that this is the result of a discussion of 1 year and a half, or more or less, and that we should not be, even if I, again, welcome all this impressive work of analysis of the text and everything, also the work from the task force in trying to accommodate it on the fly as we are doing. But I don't see anything here that could make us or prevent us from having a significant and meaningful agreement or understanding about what this proposal as a proposal means and where we are with respect to this proposal. So I'd like please to urge the other board members who haven't spoken until now to at least share your views, because otherwise we will be here in a situation where it is not very clear what the board approach is. Now before we break, Rich, please.
I was just going to ask that when we come back from the break, could we go through comments on 5700? That's all I was asking for.
Thank you. I'm sure we will. Andy, please.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to the 5407 that represented one of my most significant concerns. I am concerned that just putting C in with all the other pieces, I'm going to try, but I'm not concerned I'm concerned that's not going to do it. I'll do my best. Just wanted to point out in the yellow material we just saw, the 5406 uses the phrase single entity. I think that's the first time we've used the phrase single entity. I think I understand we're settled on group and components and so forth, but I think that's a torture term. I don't think it's correct.
Thank you very much, Andy. Laurie, please.
Yeah, just the 5700 comment, as Rich mentioned, I think it's important. We haven't spent a lot of time on that language, and it sort of came out this week without a lot of changes. So I think some of us have comments, some of which may be very workable to help that a little bit. Okay, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Laurie. Hector.
Thank you, Chair. I am comfortable with the direction this is going, and I would like to support the idea of trying to fix the issues that we have identified during the break and come up with a proposal that it's not perfect, because we're not going to get to perfect, but it's something that we can present to the world and have an opportunity to get the comments that we need, those that we are discussing here, and maybe many others that we haven't seen, because we are breaking new ground here, and we need to have time to that, and we need to be prepared, and we shouldn't be embarrassed if we get comments on something that we haven't seen, because it's only been a year and a half, and this is also a moving target. So I would be comfortable with going forward and having the opportunity to get comments and keep the flexibility to adjust and to say, yes, we hear you, we're making the necessary changes. So I'm happy the way this is going.
Thank you, Hector. Rania, please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, actually, to be very honest, I tend to agree with almost everything that's been said around the table. And very much also with what Mark just said. I definitely share the concerns that have been voiced on the one hand. On the other, I agree with Mark that I think the main issue that we're dealing with, or it all boils down to the fact that we are dealing with assurance standards that are still in progress. So my question, and maybe perhaps this is a bit, late to ask this particular question, but nonetheless, I'm going to just think out loud here. Assume that we put something out that ultimately, given how assurance and reporting standards in this space ultimately end up developing, so assume that we end up having a certain piece of our code that is completely irrelevant to what actually will be done in practice. Are we okay with that? So, that's just one thing that just crossed my mind. Are we okay with having at some point a standard that is out there that has a certain piece that is not implemented in practice? So that's my first question. Second, I definitely agree with what Hector just said in the sense that we don't have to, and what others have also voiced, that, I mean, we don't have to put something out there that is perfect, understood. But I also feel that we as a board have a role to offer some guidance, to offer perspective. I mean, I don't think, I mean, we have a role to lead in this space. And so I think that we should have a clear position and we should put it forward unless, and you know, I think that's the whole point of exposure, is that, you know, we put out what we think should be the position on a certain issue, and then we wait for, you know, inputs, and then perhaps we might tweak it, adjust, but not to be, I mean, this divide, to be honest, notwithstanding everything I said, everything that's been said, I think I find it a little bit, I'm not exactly a bit uneasy with this divide around the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Rania. I'm not sure that there is a division around the table, but we'll see in a few moments. Luigi, please.
Yeah, just to clarify that you're right, Gabriela, that we agree the strategy, the important lines and so on, and I confirm that I agree with them. The point is that I'm pretty concerned how this work is going on, because just now, a few minutes ago, we, at least I, understood correct. I was, before this this meeting, I concluded that, for example, 547.3 was an obscure paragraph, and I was not able to understand it. And just a few minutes ago, I was told that it is really devastating, because if applied in this way, this would mean that a sustainability assurance practitioner basically need to be independent from the entire world, because let's say there are the possibility that the value chain entities changes overnight. They could change, let's say the sustainability assurance client could change the information from time to time and so on. They could also include a number of value chain entities information. And so it will become something what, frankly, it is practical, in practice, inapplicable. And also illogical. And this was an understanding that I gathered just a few minutes ago. So working on the details in this respect is very key in order not to issue something that could impair the reputation of this board. Because if we issued with similar matter, I'm pretty sure that our reputation would be at risk. Sorry for that.
Thank you, Luigi, and thank you for expressing it so clearly and openly. Sadia, please.
So these sections were never going to be easy. A lot of what we're discussing is not something that we put forward, but actually what the reporting framework and the assurance framework is first to deal with. And I've always mentioned that these sections worry me in terms of whether these are clear and the implementation of it, and whether this is helpful. And some of the concerns point to it. But I'm really grateful at the same time, when Mark opened, he said that this is an exposure draft. It is to be improved upon. We could remove things that are unworkable, and we will be editing on these, but at least we have something in to test the market. With other practitioners, I really liked how we streamlined. We deleted a lot, and personally, that was causing confusion. The more guidance we were putting on a difficult area was causing more questions to be asked rather than answering questions I already had. On 5407, the reason I put my hand down, because I thought Christelle made an excellent point. She provided clarity to a scenario that Luigi raised. And I actually thought that that should be way higher than C. If we could actually scope that scenario out of the section. And the other one that keeps on coming up is that it's only on material value chain. I know it's in the definition, but if we're trying to provide clarity on a section that is complex, it's worth repeating under the introduction. Those are scoped out. So we know what we're dealing with on the section. But I do appreciate that this and 5700, which we come into our complex scenarios that we don't have real life evidence or something to grasp on. And as the practitioners around the table ask questions, I'm reminded of more and more things that are going to be concerning as the times go on. And maybe a bit of maybe I should leave it with a question. If we could get clarity what happens after exposure draft on these two sections, on the type of feedback we hear, and what could be done. Can we write stricter standards? Can we weaken the standards? And can we remove it? Because I think that setting the bar at the right level is what is needed in this time of uncertainty, rather than setting a bar that is unattainable.
Thank you, Sadia. I don't know exactly the order, but I think it was Christelle.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I want to say that globally, I think the both work streams have done a tremendous work. We are now at the end of the first phase where we need to be proud of what we deliver, but we acknowledge also that we still have a year to work on it. Yeah, more or less. But I think we found some way to address one of the very new question. Of course, there was this very new question about other practitioners. So making it neutral, not only for PAs, etc. This was a very high objective. But then the other very new element in there was about the value chain. And so, yes, we took a little time to land, but I think in substance, we are there. We see what we... So I'm sure after the break, we will have something that is still flexible enough, like Mark wants to keep it. But also avoiding us to have a flow of criticism or questioning about the value chain interpretation. So we might come back on the work afterwards, after the answers of the ED, but I'm sure we will get it done, and after the break we will get to the point. So thank you very much, Work Stream.
Thank you very much, Christelle. Vanya, please.
Thank you, Gabriela. And I'd like to echo my perception is that Workstream 1 has been working quite diligently in order to solve all the points that we marked during the meeting last week. I also understand Luigi's worries, and to be quite candid, Mark, I think that a great portion of that could have been avoided if we were to receive the test before, instead of at the moment of the meeting. I think that you would have the opportunity to read it more carefully and be more easy at that. That being said, I'm quite supportive of the proposed test that Workstream 1 is presenting. And I think that we must use common sense right now, as Sadia said. We are discussing a exposure draft and not the final standard or final code to be presented. So we'll have to hear from the public, and that's the most important point. We must have a text that is clear enough to stimulate good comments, so we can work upon them and then have a final test on that. And to make it even worse, we are discussing a standard that is related to other standards that do not yet exist. We do not yet have the standard for assurance. We do not have full standard for reporting, but we are trying to prepare the ground for the code to be fit for purpose in this scenario. So we must use common sense. and do our best now and put it out to hear from the stakeholders and then work on it and have a final text in due time. But I'm supportive of what is being proposed right now.
Thank you very much, Vania. Paul, please.
Thank you. If anything, just to kind of revalidate the points being made by other members, and if anything, just to kind of be very conscious that this is about an exposure draft. The consultation process is about us taking a step to broaden thinking well beyond the perspectives of the board. So we should not be afraid of kind of adverse or kind of pushback feedback, because that is exactly what helps us make sure the ultimate output is truly fit for purpose. And because I like some of the terminology I've heard from fellow members in terms of this is about testing, it's about triggering feedback, it's about stimulating feedback. So we need to be kind of conscious not to be to put out content that will, if anything, give the broadest spectrum of pushback so that the next steps are as well informed as possible. That if we try to be cautious and do only what we feel will not give us adverse pushback, we might lose opportunities to get new perspectives, new inputs that can really catalyze our ultimate outcome. So maybe it's because I'm a non-practitioner, I can make these statements, but we need to have the bravery to take the steps that help us put out the best fit for purpose ultimate content and use this consultation process to trigger that, stimulate as much constructive feedback to inform that. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Chana.
Thanks, Gabriela. So, I mean, I also agree with a lot of the points made. I think we need to keep in mind that this is a new area. It's constantly changing. This board did a roundtables at the beginning of the year, March, April, and we took in feedback from various stakeholders, which was quite different to the approach adopted by IAASB. And we have continued the consultation with the stakeholders. This document at this stage is never going to be perfect. It will require input once it goes out to the broader public. I mean, at the moment, there's a limited population looking at it, and it needs input from various stakeholders. Of course, if there's a big issue, then we're happy to look at it. But I think we have been working very diligently with the various comments. I mean, I think there was about, I don't know, maybe over 70 emails over the last 24 hours. And to Vanya's point, sorry, Vanya, the issue was that it was moving, and so that's why we didn't have time to circulate another draft before the meeting today, and we thought it's best that Mark walks the board through the points because it was changing all the time. And we have to keep in mind that ISBA is the last cab off the rank. ISSB is done. IAASB has issued the exposure draft. And I think we need to put something out there so that we have enough time to consult and meet that deadline of end of next year. And the thing is, we don't have time for 2 exposure drafts. So those are some of the considerations, and I think we are at the stage of diminishing returns, and we need to fix this as best as possible, and then put it out for exposure. Thanks, Gabriela.
Thanks very much, Chana. Sanjeev.
Thanks, Gabriela. I'll keep it brief. We're almost 2 hours into our discussion already. I think, first of all, as Chana said, the work done by Workstream 1 is absolutely appreciable. There is no doubt about it that they have put a huge effort. No doubt about it. Having said that, when I hear the comments starting with Luigi, Laurie and others, and how Crystal had explained it, what is covered there. Imagine us going through those challenges sitting here right now. What will happen when it goes as an exposure draft? It should not be something which is inoperable. Nothing can be fit and perfect, I can understand. And having said that, the effort is always to make sure that something which goes out, we should not be looking at a re-exposure at all. So that, I think, is a worry and a concern which I think all of us will have, including Mark is nodding, and I absolutely agree. That's the effort all of us are making. So there are concerns. Let's see how they get addressed. But yes, we're looking at a deadline. We're looking at probably working backward with the clock ticking away. And we probably are last in that series of people coming out with what we need to do. So let's see how it goes. That's all I need to say right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjeev. Yao Shu.
Thank you, the chair. And I agree that most of the points that the members just said, and just like the value chain, and I think the sustainability, the issues are very, very complex, and the environment is changing and the concern is changing. So maybe we can't have the perfect option, but I think we should have the flexible option, and we can get the inputs or the responses from the public. So my point is we should move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yao Shu. Sanjeev, do you still want to speak, or it's just your hand?
Felicia's hand is up, Gabriela.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry? Oh, I couldn't see it. Sorry, Felicia. Felicia. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Chair. Without belaboring the point, I think the other colleagues have mentioned it. Like it has always been mentioned that the perfect can be the enemy of the good. I really appreciate the discussions that are happening. Luigi's concerns are very valid. But whenever the Workstream 1 interjects, they bring very good conversations, and I think they put forward some explanations that make a lot of sense. That said, in the last 2 years, I've seen that even when we are doing some drafting of the new standards, we also tend to look at even the existing code, and there are some small configuration amendments that happen. So I think the code is not static, it changes over time. There could be changes that will happen in the future, and therefore, I fully support that we need to do an exposure draft. It's not a final standard, and therefore, I think the direction that the board is taking is quite legit. I just had maybe a question for clarification. If, say, for instance, today we said there are a few issues that are still pending, is there a flexibility for allowing the work stream to maybe address those issues after this board meeting, and then we approve the ED today, pending those small amendments to be addressed maybe in a couple of days? Is it something that is doable? It's not as procedural. It's not allowed to be done in that maybe for Ken to address. But otherwise, I think I fully support the fact that we need to have this out as an exposure draft instead of waiting for a future time. Thank you.
Thank you, Felicia. Yeah, before I ask Mark or Ken to respond to any questions, let's finish with the interventions. James, please.
Thank you. 2 points. No, I think we should endeavor to draw a close at this meeting. We don't have a mechanism for ballot voting, not within our existing or our prospective terms of reference. So I think we utilize our in-person meeting to its fullest today. On the substance, just advice or listening to the conversation and perhaps echoing Sadio, this is an entry point. What I'm hearing is there's concern and confusion when applying the value-added entity requirement in anticipation of a number of potential scenarios, and that creates an anxiety and confusion. To the extent that we have a scenario in mind, at least one, and the conditions or the circumstances of that scenario that we're envisioning, as Sadia said, let's repeat if it's a material area. Let's repeat that it's where you're touching the evidence and have no other relationship, or you have a relationship with that entity, et cetera, et cetera. That precision in the drafting of the scenario of the entry scenario that we can all arrive at, I think will help us get clarity around what that provision may potentially address. And it's not all of the scenarios, but if there is one in mind in which we can all accept and understand, that's the one that should be labeled. The question then to stakeholders is, does that get applied to different scenarios? What might they be? Do we extend that type of provision? And so I'm just encouraging the drafting to not be broad, but be very narrow, and the expansion of the point can happen after exposure. But the precision in the conditions or the circumstances that we can find acceptable in this scenario, I think should feature in the requirement. Again, I think it's an entry point, as we all know, in an evolving space. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. Sungnam, please.
Thank you, Gabriela. I can hear both sides. On one hand, I believe Luigi made a good, valid point, reminding us that the importance of our board's reputation in issuing a draft without what careful consideration. But on the other hand, this endeavor will be entry point. We can do better after hearing from the stakeholders. And I understand that we need to move on as we promised, and as we made commitment. So on a procedural matter, I have a question, because if we take a break and then the workstream 1 just discuss new wording for the third block or third point, and then after we join again, convene again, then we'll discuss section 5700, and there could be other significant issues. So how can we manage this meeting tonight from my side? So I believe the best way will be we'll continue to discuss and hear any comments regarding section 5700, and we take a break, and workstream 1 just discuss all outstanding issues and reconvene the meeting again afterward. Thank you.
Thank you for that alternative path proposed, Sungnam. Well, I'm here a little bit in the hands of the working group, who better than anyone else knows what's the best way to address. I think that you may be right there. It's just that I was afraid, and Mark was suggesting us to break, that we could be a little bit tired. But I understand that you may have a point that we may want to discuss everything after the work stream has reconsidered or considered all the comments. Mark, back to you.
So I think there are two issues to deal with. One is the comments on 5700. One is a revised section 5407, where we try to bring out the point that Christelle raised. We have been circulating some wording within the group at the moment. I might suggest that Channa, if you can cast your eye over that in your email, and if you're content with it, we'll ask Ken to circulate it to board members. And then maybe, Gabriella, the way to do this is to have a short break, a comfort break, and then to resume with questions that board members have on 5700. I very strongly support the notion raised by board members that this is a consultation draft. We have a lot to learn because things are developing and developing at a fast pace. And the whole point is to have an exposure draft that gives us the basis for that engagement and to learn how to finalise the standard in a way that maximises its effectiveness and its usefulness. And that's what we've sought to do as a work stream. And I think that that is the basis for us to go out and engage. I think to think that an exposure draft has to be perfect sort of presupposes we're not minded to change anything, whereas we are very minded to change as we learn more and get more feedback.
So, Mark, I'm sorry, but I did not understand your proposal. So you want to break now?
What I was going to say is have a short break, say no more than 10 minutes, yes, to allow people to grab a cup of coffee or something. And then what we'll do is we'll resume with questions on 5700. And then what we'll also do is, subject to Channa being happy with the document that he's got, we will circulate revised wording for 5407 that seeks to address the point that Christelle raised that a number of board members endorsed.
Okay, but in that case, I will kindly ask the board members to consider an extension of the meeting. I'm sorry, I know that it's Friday and that for some of you, it's very late, but I think that we have to, this is the final stretch. So I would kindly ask you to consider the possibility of having to extend the meeting for 45 minutes or 1 hour or something like that. I hope that we don't need it, but well, and special apologies to Channa and Jeff, for whom it's very late, and Sonam, but I'd kindly ask for your understanding so that we can still stick on the ambition of having this finished and approved today. So I'll take your advice and suggestion and guidance, Mark, and we will break for I'll say 13 minutes so that we come back at 15 past the hour. No, sorry. Again, I'm wrong. Well, let's break for 10 minutes. But before we break, let me just so that during the break we can reconsider everything. Try to wrap up a little bit where we are after having heard from everybody, I think, around the table. I think that we all agree on the principles. So there is nothing strategic on the options that we have made that has to be reconsidered. We all agree that as much as possible we should get ready with this exposure draft by today. We all agree that this is not going to be the perfect proposal, but we also agree, and I take stock of what Christelle mainly so well stated, that we need this to be the best product that we can offer at this stage. And so all these comments and suggestions are very welcome, and I very much appreciate them. And the work that is being done on the fly to adjust the proposal and enhance its quality, this is very welcome. We should aim at delivering today or approving today the best product possible, and that's the effort that we are making. So please, during the break and the analysis that you will all be doing on the text that is distributed and the one that will be distributed, please try to focus on anything that might, from your perspective, be unacceptable and totally unacceptable for us in terms of putting this exposure draft forward, having in mind what has been repeated, that this is an exposure draft. We are learning. We will keep on learning. We want to hear from the stakeholders. Of course, we want to avoid a huge criticism on some proposals which were technically not sustainable or not supportable. So this is the line of thinking that I think, should adopt during this the rest of the meeting. And we will now break for 10 minutes. So we will reconvene at 19 past the hour, right? Okay.
Thank you.
See you in 10 minutes.
Thank you, everyone. We'll be back in 10 minutes.
Hi.
Hi, Begonia.
Hello, Gabriela. Sorry, but I will have to stop at 5:15. I can be, sorry, 6:15.
Okay, let's see what we can do until then. I'm so sorry, but I'm sure you understand that this is a critical day for us. But
Yeah,
we'll do our best. Okay.
I understand it, but I have a doctoral appointment at 6:30 and I have to rush.
Yeah,
I
of
cannot
course.
change that.
So let's start then. It's 9 past the hour, 19 past the hour, and let's restart. And I'm gonna give you the floor.
Thanks, Gabriella. So really, I want to very quickly hand it over to board members who have comments on section 5700. I only want really to say from the work streams perspective, again, the purpose of developing 5700 was very much to support a consultation and engagement with stakeholders. We can even ask a very open question about, is it needed and is it a proportionate way to achieve the objectives that we want? But again, if we don't have text in the exposure draft, we can't later bring it in and without a re-exposure. So it's very much done for that. And I think also it now that we've sent around the text that we'll also discuss later about the revised 5706, it shows the importance of having this section as a basis for engagement. So those are really the points I want to make. Sylvia, I know you're about to share the screen, but do you want to add anything that I have forgotten there?
Regarding 5700?
5700.
No, I think, Mark, you covered all the changes we have proposed since the Wednesday version.
Yeah. So in that case, I'm happy to hand over to board members, Gabriella, who might have questions or comments.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And I see that there are already some. I think that Sunam has his hand up, but I believe that he forgot to put it down. Right, Sunam? Okay, Rich, please.
Thank you. And my first request relates to an understandability issue, because I maybe it's just me, but I'm not clear. The application material in 5700, is this the application material that a sustainability assurance practitioner who is doing work at the value chain should consider as to their relationship, their independence from the value chain entity?
No.
It's not. What does it represent then?
What it is, Rich, is Mark, if that's okay, I'm happy to explain it, but you can
Yeah,
come
sorry,
back.
I'm just having a problem here.
Yeah. What section 5700 is addressing is the interest relationships all circumstances, in fact, it says so all circumstances in the title, Sylvia, between the firm and the value chain entities. And that's only when the firm is using, as paragraph 2 says, is using the work of a sustainability assurance practitioner at the value chain entity. The reason is because the firm is using the work of that practitioner and therefore has to evaluate that work. So it is about the relationships that the firm might have with the value chain entity. It's not with respect to the sustainability assurance practitioner.
So you're saying that the firm has to be independent in accordance with these sections of the value chain entity, even though they're not engaged by the value chain entity, their client does not have any financial interest in the value chain entity, and they're getting an opinion or a report or some kind of sort of confirmation under 5407, and they have no ability to dig into the work papers because they have no DSR. Why would we expect there needs to be an assessment of independence by the value chain or by the firm's SAP on the value chain? You're going to have, they have no ability to, all they can do is take the sustainability information provided by the value chain entity and the opinion of the sustainability assurance provider at the value chain and use whatever's in those materials to incorporate in or include in what they need to do at the SIS group. They're not able to do additional procedures, thus they can't be influenced by or can't influence things at the value chain. I'm struggling with, we use having something audited by another party as a safeguard throughout the code. We obviously don't require this when we get SOC reports from other entities. I just don't understand the practicality. I don't understand the threat. As I said last week, I don't see anything of the threat that's going to be created that is so great. And I think this is just going to lead to massive numbers of scope limitations and disclaimers for something that is not really a threat to the conceptual framework. And that is not in the public interest.
Rich, if I may respond, and Mark, feel free to come in as well. We're not dealing with a SOC type report here. This is not a situation of divided responsibility. The reporting firm is taking full responsibility for the information that is included in the sustainability information that is subject to assurance. So that is what the work is driven by the assurance standard. This is not for the code to say whether the firm has to review the work or not. The firm has, according to ISA 5000, the firm has to review that work and be satisfied that it can go ahead and use that work if the work has been done at the value chain entity.
But there's nothing to review. It doesn't have DSR. All it can do is take the published information and the opinion thereon and add that into their own things. And I'm struggling with what we're saying here, because what you're creating, first of all, there's no way an SAP can know who all the value chain entities might be before they accept an engagement. And even once they've accepted it, they can change during the course of the engagement. So it's an impossibility to achieve. And I don't see where we've considered whether this is a real threat under the conceptual framework. They have no ability to be influenced by whatever relationship, circumstance, or interest they have over there, because they can't alter or change anything that's produced and opined on by an SAP for the value chain entity.
So the scenario, Rich, that we were trying to deal with is you may have a situation where you have a very significant reporter in the value chain, and the information that comes from that value chain entity is significant in the context of the entity's reporting. So therefore, what we've done is we've leveraged the conceptual framework and we have put in that no or reason to believe test to say, is there any link that may compromise your independence? So that's why we're saying that you leverage the conceptual framework and do it that way. Because what happens if you had a scenario where you have something that is fundamental in the value chain reporting and the provider of assurance to the sustainability assurance client happen to have a material financial interest in it? This would at least ensure that the conceptual framework was applied, any threat to independence was identified, and then it could be appropriately safeguarded.
Well, so Mark, I assumed your exact scenario in thinking through this. And my view would be your sustainability assurance opinion on the client would be to make reference that it is in reliance upon the work of another sustainability practitioner as it relates to X, Y, and Z percentages or amounts of the appropriate disclosures and information, not unlike what we do in the opinions on a financial statement audit when the auditor relies on the work of another auditor.
Well, that was the situation that we were looking to try and address through here, because, you know, based on some of the conversations that we've been having, we were concerned that if we didn't include anything under this section, we would get feedback through the consultation process that says you need something, and we would be unable to put that in. So this is, again, very much done to maximise our flexibility to respond. And I've already suggested in our discussions as the working group, as the work stream, that, you know, we can ask a question very specifically about, is this a proportionate and effective way of dealing with a threat, or you know, is it needed? But, you know, I think what we're trying to make sure we avoid is that ISSA 5000 doesn't provide any sort of accommodation for shared responsibility. And therefore, we took the view that it was important to include something within the consultation process that then gives us the flexibility to move back from that.
Well, if nothing else, it's a little hard to understand which entity and why it applies from what's written at the lead in here. But and one of my concerns is that a non-PA may not totally appreciate this when they're looking at it in the ED. I also think there's some places in here where it talks about things like the self-review threat, knows or has reason to believe. Well, if you're the firm, I would expect you to know whether you did something that created a self-review threat. You might not know as it relates to your network, but those are minor wordsmithing things. But I just don't think this is a practical approach. I don't think there are threats that have been identified that are substantive when you cannot do anything other than rely on that work that was those pieces of paper that are essentially the sustainability assurance information and the opinion thereon, which is in it itself going to be a challenge, because in some cases you may not be able to, you know, I just think the more scope limitations and the more disclaimers you have, I fail to see how that's in the public interest. And in this case, I don't see how this is going to lead to anything else. And I also don't see where we have identified a significant threat. Now, I could grant you, we have put safeguards in. And so, I mean, if that's all, if we're comfortable that those safeguards work, the one thing that doesn't address is that there are going to be situations where people have material business relationships. And I don't know that you've addressed that in terms of whether there's a safeguard to address that. Maybe it's having an appropriate reviewer, but I'd ask you to consider that. I'll stop here. Others obviously need to be able to weigh in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Rich. Luigi, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a bit confused, frankly, about the process we are following here. I went to see the terms of reference of what an exposure draft is. And frankly, it is not a consultation draft. It is not something where we put forward a number of requirements and then we cancel them and we are done. The terms of reference that I have, which is the one that I received when I entered into this board, states that in voting in favor of a release of an exposure draft, a member of the PIAC is confirming that he or she is satisfied that the draft would form an acceptable international pronouncement in the event that no comments were received on exposure. So basically, it is not that. It is not this way. This is a consultation paper, not an exposure draft. And frankly, I do not agree that we change the due process in this way. I don't think it is feasible. And frankly, even if we go into this direction, I'm not sure that this will save us from re-exposing something if we decide at the end of the process, for example, to go with this consultation, only not an exposure draft, with this consultation draft, with the section 5,700, and then at the end we decide to go with the final pronouncement without it. Frankly, I think that going on reading the terms of reference, I think that this is a substantial change, and therefore we should be in a position to re-expose if we would like to apply correctly the due process. So I'm pretty worried about that, because at the end we would vote something that we are pretty sure that at the end should bring us to re-expose, and therefore we are introducing here something we would like to avoid. I would like next year to be in a position to vote the final pronouncement, but in this direction, I don't think it will be feasible, or at least we have a very big risk that this will not be the case.
Okay, thank you, Luigi. But I'm sorry, but we are not yet there. We are not discussing the voting about the final proposal.
No, but I say that this is not an exposure draft. This is a consultation, which is not in the due process. So I do not understand what we are voting tonight.
I'm sorry, but I don't agree with you. This is an exposure draft, and what we are doing, we are not changing the due process, Luigi. What we are doing is stating and assuming that what we are exposing can be subject to some changes and adjustments depending on the responses that we will have. And what will for sure happen if we don't, well, I'm going to stop here. So yeah, we are not, we understand that there are disagreements with what's here, and we are trying to deal with them, and that's fine, that's right. But we are not speaking about changing the due process or forcing whatever might be. Laurie, please.
Sorry, can I comment on 5,700?
Yes.
Sorry, I would be very brief. I'm not in agreement with this section, because simply if we are if a sustainability assurance provider is relying on the other on the work assurance work of another practitioner, and this other practitioner is independent, I don't see any reason why we need to look through and go into the value chain entities, relationships, and so on, because there are no issues at all with this, simply because the assurance service provider is using the work of another one. And so this is per se a valuable safeguard on all these type of risk and so on. Then the second comment is that here the task force is using the concept of no reason to believe. The point is that they are using a reverse concept of no reason to believe. The reason to believe, as intended by the code, is the method to identify relationship that might bring with them a threat to independence. Here we are saying that the known reason to believe is used to identify a relationship, not relationship with specific threat attached. So I asked the task force to review. Well, I'm not in agreement with this section, but assuming that they will go on, I asked them to review the known reason to believe and to put it in the right way, because elsewhere I suspect that this will be the source of major comment letters. Thank you.
Thank you, Luigi. Mark, I suppose that you prefer to collect a number of comments and then react, but if you want to come in, just let me know.
Yeah, yes, please. I think we can collect more comments and react after that.
Okay, wonderful. Sungnam, please.
Here, my question is about the location of this new section 5,700. if this section relates to the relationship or interest between the firm and value chain entity, my question is, why don't we move this section up just at the bottom of the paragraph R5407.3? So I have a hard time to understand why we need to have a separate new section at the very end of the whole part 5. Thank you.
Thank you, Songnam. Andy, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have good concerns that I've expressed about the 5700, and I don't understand. Maybe I'll sign on to Rich's comments about it. I don't understand the threats that are being addressed, especially, and perhaps this follows somewhat to what Songnam was saying about the 5407 section that we have, and the possible adjustments that were made over the break. I'm concerned, and I need to take this on board, and that the 5700 section conflicts with some of the provisions that we've just changed in the 5407. That concerns me. I do want to make sure that I heard, as Rich said, about the value chain, and that the threats to the value chain is that the relationship between the practitioner and the value chain and it's the reporting entity can change in the flesh and the stroke of a pen as contracts are entered into or exercised. And so I don't see the threat. I see that as relationship. There was a comment about taking full responsibility for the information in the report, and I'm not quite sure. I mean, I agree, but I disagree that I think the reporting framework in S2 and IFRS S2 and dealing with value chain information and information that's being reported, say, on scope 3 from the value chain, is that part of those disclosures deal with that the reporting entity, well, I'll call our client in that case, makes disclosures about the verifiability of source of the information. So I think if the reporting entity were to make the bold assertion that these amounts are what they are, then I think we'd be in an extraordinary circumstance, and I don't think that needs to be addressed in our ethical standard. But I just don't see the threat that incorporating information from other entities in the manner in which I believe they're going to be incorporated in the S2 creates a threat. And so my continued preference is that 5700 is not fit for purpose, and I don't think it's helpful. Just want to make sure there was nothing else here, and that's all I'll say. I have more later, but that's all for now.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Laurie, please.
Yeah, just make sure. Yeah, look, I think Rich stated it well, and Andy extended it, but this was my concern last week when we were at the board meeting, and so I had sort of flagged that I'm interested in waiting to see where this lands. I in some sense, I think, not to repeat, but if you're either independent individually and your value chain provider has confirmed their independence, this seems like a backdoor way to do a bunch of additional work around that isn't warranted. And we've talked about the complexity of all these provisions and the burdens that they place. And so for me, I do sort of a cost-benefit analysis and get to the question is, what big problem is this trying to solve? I don't see the need for it. The other comment that I have is, when we get down in here, we talk about, the firm knows or has reason to believe that for large firms is very complex. Attributing any knowledge that may exist somewhere in a firm, somewhere in the world, to an engagement team is exactly what will happen in that case. And I think that's impossible for firms to even manage. At most, it would be an engagement team knows or has reason to believe, because if they are unaware that somewhere in the world something might have been done, there's no way it's impacting their independence. But what I would say is, I think given where we've landed in requiring independence confirmations or looking at opinions that have independence confirmed, has already resolved this issue, and now we're adding a high degree of complexity that doesn't seem to have a case for it. So I'll leave it there. I'm very much in agreement and was there last week. By the way, I'm not raising a new point. I recognize that, but I think it's important when we think about the volume of this and what we're putting out there and how much unnecessary complexity we don't want to have in this code. We want to focus on the fundamentals that matter.
Okay, thank you, Lori. Sadia, I know that you are first, but I think that Ken might want to react to these interventions. If you allow me, I'm going to give the floor to Ken.
No, I was going to respond in totality.
Okay, so Sadia, please.
I've noted this before, that the section only has application material and no requirement. So technically it's only guidance. I've heard 4 very concerning expressions from 4 different board members, and this is not the first time we've heard it. I wondered if a solution is to take this out of the ED and put it in the EM and test it in the EM rather, because there isn't a requirement, and we would get the same feedback that Mark started off with. We have a general question whether this is needed, is it helpful, is it workable, but in the EM and not in the ED. And I'm so glad Ken didn't reply, because I think, Ken, this is something you spoke to me about previously, and I just want to know if it's a workable solution.
Thank you, Sadia. Ken, please.
Yeah, to be quite frank, Sadia, I'm not sure it's going to be much different putting it in the EM or in the exposure draft, because at the end of the day, the board needs to be satisfied that it has a set of proposals it can go forward with. So at the end of the day, we are out to seek stakeholder feedback on the provisions, absolutely. And my sense is it would be better to go forward with a clear mind that this is what the board believes it should address in terms of the particular issue here, and that is any potential interest relationships, etc., between the firm and the value chain entity. But what I was going to suggest, Gabrielle and Mark, if that's okay, is that we can take those comments back and do the quick turn, because I think what we are trying to do here is not completely close off the door to any consideration of threats that might be created. I understand that there is perception that the way the provisions are articulated, that essentially the firm is being put on notice that it needs to proactively identify those interest relationships, circumstances, and deal with those relationships across the value chain entities that might be involved. But that is really not the intent. As you put it, Mark, this is intended to be, and I don't know whether light touch is the right term, because we don't want to really put across the code as being light touch, but we really want to address an issue that might arise. It is about dealing with the threats that might be in play when the firm has potentially interest, etc. So there's a way to maybe address those comments, and maybe what we need is just an overarching piece of just an overarching provision that really puts into play the reason to believe principle, but in a way that doesn't make it appear that the firm is or will need to proactively identify those threats. And I heard Lori again, is the firm going to have to kick into play its entirety, its entire system of monitoring, independence, etc., in order to be able to meet the expectations under this section, and that is not the intent. And maybe pitching it at the level of the engagement team or the engagement leader, or is perhaps a more balanced approach, and hopefully that might meet some of the concerns that have been expressed by some of the board members here.
I think that's certainly a question that we're open to asking, Ken. But I think really to just sort of come back on the feedback from board members, this is an exposure draft, which is quite unique because it's an exposure draft that responds to ethical and independence issues where a reporting framework is yet to operate and the assurance framework is yet to be finalised. So it is obviously more flexible and more variable than some of the things that the board has previously seen. But that is a virtue of where we are. This was intended very much as, I suppose the word I would use is a backstop. And that is why it's there, crafted in application material and not in requirements. But it's an important thing to flag because we believe that it would come up as feedback. And that's why our approach has been to leverage the conceptual framework and also reflect the fact that where ISSA 5000 is, where there is responsibility for information, ISSA 5000 is not predicated on shared responsibility. So this is intended to address a possibility that there is a threat that undermines trust in the information that's being reported and its assurance. I think, we're not setting a work requirement in here. We're trying to look at independence considerations, and it's based on what you know or have reason to believe. And that's a consequence of what companies are being asked to report and ultimately what assurance providers are being asked to assure. So, I think that personally, I think that you go into this with eyes wide open saying there is a threat, but we want to ask our stakeholders, is this a threat that we need to address through the code, or is it something that actually people are comfortable is not a scenario that is going to arise or one that is going to undermine the public interest in any way? But I strongly believe it is in the public interest to ask the question and at least then elicit feedback on that basis.
Thank you, Mark. Laurie, please.
Yeah, look, so part of the issue is when I read this is a really long thing. I think, Mark, what I'm hearing from you is this should be in like one paragraph, and it should be limited to what the engagement team knows or has reason to believe. And, they may have come across information. And frankly, I don't disagree if there's some piece of information they're aware of. That's just integrity, right? But the way this is written is, even if it's application material, it's a big, long dialogue of things to be done and thought of. And I think Rich's point is, in a way, it's a backdoor against 4507. And so that's my concern. If this were shrunk down to one paragraph, which I think is very possible to do, you can capture that concept and applied to the engagement team, because the engagement team is where we're worried about the independence. That might be workable. So I'll pause there. I don't know what anybody else thinks about that, but this looks extremely heavy for, picking up the possibility of something out there. And I get how hard this is, and I get in drafting this, it's difficult, but I think if the answer is we want something in there that picks up the concept to send out for feedback, I think something much more short and crisp could do that effectively for us.
Well, one of the things that I mulled over in that respect, Laurie, and I'll answer your question, with something that I have been considering as we've gone through this and as we've worked through it as a work stream is actually, would it be enough to have section 5700 as just paragraphs 1 and 2 and no application material? Now, I can guarantee you that a lot of people, particularly the non-PAs, will then come back and say, how do we apply this? So we'll be asked to do application material. But, from a sort of what matters, it's the importance of applying the fundamental principles in accordance with the conceptual framework to a threat. And it is by nature of the fact that the reporting framework is what it is. So that's and I do think that sort of when we had an earlier discussion in September's board meeting, I think there was a pushback from the board about the importance of having more guidance in this respect. But personally, if the board thinks that there is merit in addressing the existence of a possible threat, then do we just do that with those introduction paragraphs and say no more? But I do think there's a strong risk that non-PAs in particular will say, okay, what does this mean in your world?
Okay, thank you, Mark. Begonia, please.
Thank you. Well, this is a very interesting discussion indeed, and it seems that there are some different views at the board, which is at the moment that you are now is a bit worrying. But I would say that from the public interest perspective, it's important that the firm is independent and is perceived and by the users, by others, as in the firm is seen as independent from the value chain entity, whose information is material for the reporting entities. So it's not about any value chain. Someone has said that previously, but it's important to insist that we are talking about material information only. And let's keep in mind also that we are talking about value chain entities providing information on financial materiality and impact materiality. Everything is really new. And I think that providing guidance on that is important. And for the code of ethics, it is going to be, well, a sort of a new, in dealing with these new things is important. So I think that providing guidance, even if you are dealing with something which is relatively unknown, is important. So any threat that you might consider that might appear could be highlighted in the code. That's my personal view on that, in order to help the practitioners, the non-professional practitioners, to do their job in a good manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Begonia. Well, I think that we don't have anyone else. Mark.
No, just thank you for, Begonia. That's helpful. And, I think one of the things that we have to bear in mind is that this is a public interest issue, as you rightfully remind us. If we did shorten this section down, as I said, is an option to Laurie, it would lack any sort of guidance over factors to help address any threat that was identified. So, the profession might be happy with that, but actually non-PAs who want to use the code might actually find that quite hard to live with. So I again come back to the point that this is something that is worth us consulting on and using the flexibility to revise, change, remove on the back of the feedback that we get.
Thank you, Mark. Well, Luigi.
As I mentioned before, I'm not in agreement with how 5700 is now shaped. In my view, this is something that should be, first of all, incorporated into the text, not as a standalone section. Probably, I don't know whether in 547, maybe, in a shorter form, probably, and in a more reasonable way. On the other hand, if we feel that the non-PA could have issues in understanding, I think that it is time to think about explanatory memorandum structure or even non-authoritative material in order for them to be trained and to be able to use the code. Here, the issue is that we may worry that a non-PA cannot understand this section, but the real problem is that non-PA would really struggle to use a code which is 250 pages long, with similar complexity, without having used it before. So in any case, non-authoritative material would be necessary, and training and any sort of activity that could provide facilitation for them to understand. So I would not be very worried about this paragraph, whether it is too short. I would like to be, I am very worried to have the right thing written into this exposure draft. And I don't think as it is now, it is the right one. And frankly, I'm not in agreement.
Thank you, Rich.
Yeah, I'm not really behind trying to shorten this, because if I don't like this approach. If we're going to expose it, then the detail is necessary, including the critical aspects with regard to how you might deal with the situation and what safeguards apply. And to not have those in there to help a non-SAP understand that would be problematic. And Mark, I really, my comments are in the public interest. I don't think suggesting that the profession has an interest one way or the other, and that is not the issue here. In fact, I'm more concerned that the non-PAs are going to struggle with this, and that's why the detail is probably more helpful to include than an abbreviated paragraph. Thanks.
Thanks, Rich. Sanjeev?
Thanks, Gabriela. Very briefly, I think Laurie made a point on how to structure it, and I'm not going to repeat it. Mark, the question is a question to myself, and I think probably I'm addressing it to Ken. We've used the word as a consultative approach a couple of times. It is an exposure draft, as Gabriela mentioned, and we are following the due process. When you're finalizing the text planning document, time and again, Ken reminded us that, look, this is an exposure draft which was approved by the board. You got to make only those changes to the ED which you got comments on. Otherwise, it is as good as approved by the board. So it's a very important document to approve. And what if the consultation which is coming is in a multiple way, which creates a bigger challenge for us tomorrow? So I just want to address that point in my mind much more. Because if it is an ED, we need to be careful in what goes out as an ED and may not be as a consultative process. And as Sadia mentioned, can we take something to the EM instead of the ED? A point worth considering. And I stop here.
Thank you, Sanjeev. I had seen Ken or Sungnam.
Thanks, Gabriela. I have a practical question on the screen. As in paragraph 5700.2, it says when a firm uses the work of a sustainability assurance practitioner at the value chain entity. I'm wondering if this phrase is correct, because I understand this section relates to the situation or interest or relationship between the firm and the value chain entity. So I think it should be something like when a firm performs the assurance work at the value chain entity instead of what's written on the screen here. This is first time, so I may not I may not have the full understanding of this paragraph, but at first glance, it looks like awkward or odd.
Yeah, if I may respond very, very quickly, and I know others are queued up. This section is addressing precisely as paragraph 2 says, the circumstance where the firm is using the work of another practitioner. When the firm itself is performing the assurance work, it will be covered by section 5407 because the firm will be required to apply part 5. And part 5 will deal with all the interest relationships or circumstances. So this is when this firm is using the work of another practitioner, not when it is itself performing the assurance work.
So this section is applied when the firm used the work of sustainability assurance practitioner who separately performs the work?
Correct. Yes. The other practitioner is in fact separately performing the work. Yes. I mean, if you wanted to add separately, I don't know if adds anything, but if it helps
Then
you.
my question is, I'm wondering why we need this whole application material.
Yeah, no, it is. So what I have in mind to suggest
It goes
something to
back.
workstream. Yeah, I have in mind to suggest something to workstream 1, which potentially could be rolled into 5407, but and that would be responsive to one or two other comments from some board members, but maybe
I think Ken, we need to remember that the board, it was a recommendation that came out of the board discussion at the September board meeting that this be a separate section.
Yeah, I think the geography is not so much the issue here as to what the provisions should be saying. So it can sit in a separate section, or it can sit within another section, but the important thing is really to agree what the provisions should be about.
I think you can, Andy, please.
No, thank you. Yeah, I share Signon's perplexion about that, and that's part of my concern. Is I think 5700, which as I've expressed, I would prefer not to be there. I think has conflicts with the new 5407, and I mean, I think. And I just want to say, I think I'm consistent with my earlier comments that what I was hoping we would get is a framework that would address most of the situations and not necessarily be a complete of all possible issues or all issues that might eventually could be added on to our framework. And I don't know how much longer we have to discuss this. I just want to make sure to follow up with what Luigi said earlier is I understand this isn't ED, but it is a representation of me as part of the board that it is fit for purpose. And I do only have the public interest in mind and not the profession's interest. But I just feel I must stand my ground to not endorse something for exposure that isn't without feeling intimidated and being rushed into a hasty decision on the banner that it can't be perfect, because I'm not going for perfection either. The issues that I'm raising and others raising are not under the banner of perfection, and it's not that it's just an exposure draft and we could change it later. I'm concerned that if I endorse an ED, that if there weren't, and this is what I expressed in prior standards, that if it came back with the public saying, perfect, that it would be intellectually honest of me to have an issue with it then. So, I mean, I do appreciate the civility of today's discussion. But I am very concerned on the subject that 5700 is just is not fit for purpose and moving things forward. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Mark, any reaction from you, or should we make?
I don't think I really have anything else to add, Gabriella, other than, of course, my reference to the importance of the application material was just, it was not from a profession perspective. It's just that the material in the application matter is second nature to the profession. They know and understand some of the concepts that have been drawn across into this. So it's not that it's reflecting an interest there or not. It's they will know how to do this. Non-PAs will require more guidance to help them. And that was the basis behind it. So, you know, I don't really have anything to add to it. It's just I still believe and the work stream believes strongly that this is an appropriate basis for us to go out and elicit feedback.
Thank you, Mark. Laurie, I had seen your hand, but you gave up. Okay. Chana?
So this is a question probably for Ken. Like, could we go out with 5700 with two options, the a short version and a long version, and ask a question from stakeholders?
Yeah, I'm not sure I would do that in an exposure draft channel. I mean, you might be able to do that in a consultation paper. That's less of a formal consultation. So if stakeholders feel there is a need for more or less guidance, certainly they can comment on that and the board can respond and respond appropriately without necessarily anticipating a need for re-exposure, because at the end of the day, as Mark has emphasized, this is guidance intended to assist practitioners in applying the code. And this is really intended to bring the application of the conceptual framework to this particular circumstance. But are we in a position to respond to the comments? I believe we ought to be able to respond to the comments that we have heard, Gabriela. So my suggestion would be to allow the workstream maybe 10-15 minutes to just do a quick turnaround. And then we can come back to the board going over the two sections we discussed, 5407 and this one.
Okay, Ken, that's what I was going to suggest. Sorry, we still have Laurie. Laurie.
Yeah, I just didn't want there to be confusion. I do not, and I think I said this and then talked about, oh, maybe there's possible options. You know, I do not think this belongs in the exposure draft going out for many of the reasons that people have already said. And I do have concerns about this because I think it causes all kinds of problems. And in addition, I agree with people who said, you know, we should have our exposure draft pitched, not perfect, but pretty close to where we want it. And I think this one is a big problem. So I just wanted to make sure. I think eliminating it and having it somewhere, maybe in the EM, maybe as a question, you know, however we get at that would be better placed. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Laurie, for that. Okay, then I'll take Ken's suggestion, which was going to be my own suggestion as well. I'm sorry for this, but let's break for, say, 15 minutes to allow workstream 1 to go through the comments that received and work a little bit on this. And come up with a different suggestion, and we will come back here at 25 past the hour, okay? And apologies, Begonia, whatever happens, I'm gonna send you an email later today updating you on the rest of the meeting, okay? And I'm sorry for this, but I hope you understand that's what we have to do today.
No. Sorry, but I cannot stay after the...
Yeah, of course, we understand that. I understand that. I'll keep you posted, okay?
Thank you very much, Gabriela, and good luck with voting. Bye.
Thank you. So see you well,
next time. And happy holidays. Happy holidays in any case. And
thank
you've
you.
Done I just want to say that you've done a great job, but things are it's too. I mean, it's a bad moment to be arguing about these details, but this is the happening.
That's the final stretch.
You find a way. Thank you, and happy holidays to all.
Hopefully.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So we'll be back in 15 minutes, okay? Thank you. Okay, welcome back. I think that we are still missing a number of board members. Let's wait 1 more minute to see if we have them all on board.
I think we're just waiting for Felicia and Gabriella.
We are
Oh, and
missing
Sadia.
Sadia and Yao Shu as well. Okay, we have Yao Shu.
Now
Yeah,
we're
but
waiting for Laurie,
we should
Sadia.
probably start because I'm very concerned about Chana, Jeff, Yao Shu, and Sungnam. Not to speak about the others, but these are the ones who concern me most. So let's start. Well, thank you very much to Workstream One and staff for coming back with a revised suggestion that I will ask Mark to guide us through.
Okay, thank you, Gabriella. So we'll start, if we can, with section 5407, where earlier Christelle gave us a really good suggestion as to how we can take this forward. Sylvia's going to show you the section on the screen. But what you'll see is that we, hopefully, Christelle, have been faithful to your articulation of how to deal with this issue. So now within 5407 2A1, you have 3 bullets rather than 2, which reflect the options and also try to address the concern that Luigi raised about there being 3 options. And in order to make that now work, there is now a further section at the end, 5407.6, which you'll see, although quite long in terms of heading, are independence considerations where a firm is performing assurance work on sustainability information of a value chain entity provided by the sustainability assurance client without carrying out assurance work at that entity. So this is very much intended to try and bring into text Christelle's advice to us. And I don't know whether it might be appropriate, Christelle, to ask you whether you think we have addressed your comment in an effective way.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Yeah, for sure. I think it's fully replying to my suggestion. I think this way it's plain vanilla. Thank you.
Thank you, Christelle. And I don't know, Gabriella, whether other board members may also want to comment, but I think it's positive that we have taken Christelle's suggestion and actually brought it to life in a way that does actually reflect her understanding and her proposal.
Thank you, Mark. I see Laurie.
Yeah, Mark, that helps for me as well. I had sent you a comment separately, and it was sort of around that area, and that sort of clarifies that the problem that was bothering me.
Thank you, Laurie.
That's very good, Laurie. Luigi, please.
Yeah, it is much more better than before. So I thank you, the task force, for considering our comments. I am still confused on the details, on the application details of this provision that I think require great details of explanations. And I think that probably the explanatory memorandum is the right place to explain these 3 scenarios in order for the stakeholders to understand what we are meaning here, because I'm pretty sure that it is not a matter of PA or not PA. Those that are not familiar with this new rule, we struggle to understand what we are intending here. So yes, I agree with this new release. I think then during the activity that we will perform next month, it would be necessary to clarify the details and the operational impact of these rules. Thank you.
Thank you, Luigi, and maybe in the new year, as we have a draft for the explanatory memorandum, we can have a conversation about that to make sure that we are able to address that point in a way that would in a way that would meet your concern there.
Okay, thank you very much. And the explanatory memorandum can actually be a way of addressing some of the concerns without leaving them out. Angie.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, this I think certainly does get to the heart of the major concern that I had, and I think Luigi had. And maybe this would be a place I would say, well, this isn't perfect, but I think the wording is something that would work with consultation or with exposure. But this section also had another new requirement. Have we talked about that? Another new requirement? Don't I see another requirement at the bottom?
There's one that's been added into the bottom now to address independence considerations where a firm is performing. So it's the point about you're actually performing assurance work, but not actually carrying out assurance work at that entity, which was a point in the earlier discussion about you might actually be carrying out procedures yourself rather than actually going to the entity and doing that. And that's just intended to cover that off for the sake of completeness.
Is that clear?
I'm trying. If that's Zin's response to my question. I'm not quite sure I understand why it's needed, but but thank you for the explanation. I just need to process it and not have you watch me do that.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Andy. Sunam, I had seen your hand, but yes. I don't know if you still want to speak.
Yes. Yeah. So yes, thank you, Mark. So the bottom line is, in this case, there is no new or further requirements imposed on the firm and members of the team. Is that correct?
We've just taken Christelle's articulation earlier of the third bullet. So now we've got 3.2, and in the discussion earlier, we also said what happens where a firm is performing assurance work without carrying out assurance work at that entity. So this is there for the sake of completeness, but you know, there's no, although it's there as a requirement, it was actually implicit in what was there before. So I don't believe we've added anything in terms of burden.
I understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunam.
Thank you, Sunam and Mark. I don't see anyone else wanting to comment, so I think that we can consider it stabilized, even if Andy is still processing what's written there. Sunam, do you want to?
Yes, yeah. Small thing, yeah. In terms of the distinction between assurance work and work in this paragraph, after the change, there are certain places just work without assurance, and many places assurance work. So any distinction from the work stream's perspective?
No, I'm happy to respond. There is no intended distinction between assurance work and work, because the context is clear that this is speaking about assurance work with respect to the value chain entity. I think for purposes of readability, sometimes it's useful not to repeat assurance work everywhere. in the same paragraph. As long as it's clear to readers that we are referring to the assurance work, that should be sufficient. But certainly we can double check to make sure there's consistency and equally on issues of formatting, etc.
Is that clear? So now?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Mark?
Okay. So then the other section that you've been emailed round is the way in which we propose to revise section 5700 to deal with the board's concerns about it. So in a sense, it does largely follow the construct that I mooted in discussion with Laurie earlier, that you'll see we have the introduction, a general paragraph now covering application material, 5700 3A1, and then the rest of the section is deleted, so it doesn't go through the specifics of all of the different things, but there is a new application material at the end of the section, now numbered 5700 4A1, to deal with interest relationships or circumstances involving a value chain entity. So, in response to the feedback from board members, this is very much a cut down, shorter, smaller section, which sets the overall framing and, of course, brings in that knows or has reason to believe test, which we've had in from the start. But this is intended to take out all of the other text, which hopefully addresses the concerns raised by members of the board that we are putting too much in this. And I know you raised it sort of a lot, Laurie, and you've got your hand up, so maybe I'll ask you to reflect.
I was just going to ask you if you can show the version without what's been removed, because it's short and I think people can read that. And now that you've made that point, I think I saw that.
Sylvia, can you accept the track changes and then just show the clean version to the board, please, on screen? And then, because people will actually be able to read it on one screen nearly as effectively 4 paragraphs.
So thank you. I see you made the change around the sustainability assurance team knows, and I think that's an important from a practicality standpoint, and that deals with some of the, I think, the volume concern issues as well that Rich raised. At least for me, it does. I don't want to speak for Rich. For me, that works. I mean, I prefer this. I know other people won't necessarily agree, so let me stop and see how others feel.
I think, Laurie, it's hopefully it gives us a basis to go out and seek, decent stakeholder feedback on this, and does so in a proportionate way that reflects the board's direction and feedback. But Rich, I can see your hand up as well. You may be on mute, Rich.
While we're waiting, if for me, the reason I prefer it is it's hard to argue that you know or have reason to believe you have possession of some kind of information that may impact independence, and you wouldn't do something about that, right? I like, and to me, it gets there much more crisply. Like, I understand that message when I read this, and that was lost in the previous one with all the detail.
Rich.
Yeah, I frankly am not okay with this because you have limited it to safeguards, and if you don't expressly state them, then they don't exist under our standard.
Rich, you are in effect already within the conceptual framework, so you would have to address the threats. You have to evaluate and address the threats. So already there is guidance on safeguards or actions to take, right? Under the concept framework.
That would be in 5120, Ken.
Yeah, if it is a matter of providing guidance to practitioners that, as we have discussed, can sit outside of the code, and certainly for non-PAs, they will need as much support as possibly can be provided to them.
So we need to make sure that we're clear in the EM when we explain this, that the conceptual framework, that the application of the conceptual framework also, for the avoidance of doubt, involves the application of appropriate safeguards to address any threats to independence. Rich, did you want to come back in?
I don't know. No, I don't. I was focused on the safeguards that were specific to the individual interests, relationships, and circumstances. And I find that's helpful. And I'm not sure 5120 is that specific.
Can we take away an action to make sure that we articulate this clearly in the EM?
Rania?
Yeah, thank you. So I like thank task force. I think I really like where they blended with this, and I think it raises this to a fairly principles-based level. Which I think is good for an exposure draft. So I just wanted to express my support. Thank you.
Thank you, Rania. Galen?
Yes, thanks, Mark. Just very minor suggestion. So in that last phraseology where you have the word or, wouldn't that work a little bit better between, let's say, interest or relationship?
So, sorry, Galen, can you point us to where you're saying?
Yeah, so I'm talking about the last phrasing where shall include that interest, relationship, or circumstance. Oh, I see what you never mind.
I think I think we've done now. We've taken off the track changes.
Yeah, you're okay with that. Yeah, I'm okay with that. Fine. Never mind.
Thanks, Galen. Andy?
Yeah, no, thanks, Mark and task force. I'm much more comfortable with where we're standing with this, with the shorter version of it, and that takes some of the inconsistency issues I have. But the last remaining, I think I'm responding to this language very quickly, and admittedly I raised these points before, but if we're finally addressing them now, then so be it. But this issue of and I appreciate, Mark, that the board may have given you feedback. I'm not sure it came from me, so I'm not being inconsistent on the separate section. But now we have these sections in their format that we can see. And we've got one section, 5407, called Independence Considerations Relating to Assurance Work at or with respect to a value chain entity. And I am responding to this construction of or with respect to. I like that. Then we have the now pared down section, interest, relationships, or circumstances involving value chain entities. I think it still would be clearer if we merge those two sections together. And I don't think it's just a mere drafting or geography situation. I think contextually the construct that I think me, Luigi, and others were fishing around, that maybe Christelle got us to with the paragraphs that you instructed, I think would be more instructive. And I guess I hear what you or the others say, if they were in one section as opposed to somehow they were two different things. So that's at least my response to what the new pared down section would look like, and maybe better tucked in to the section you spent some time on today.
And I take the point, Luigi, and I just appreciating sort of where we are at 2 minutes to midnight or something. Is that something that we can ask a specific question on about whether there is scope to bring the material in 5700 within 5407? And would that be something that was easier to use and easier to apply? So maybe we can ask that specifically. Sadia?
I really appreciate everyone's effort on this, and I hate to do this, but I think we effectively wrote a requirement now because we threw in a shall.
No,
in
that's
the
fine.
second last.
Yeah, Sylvia is going to raise this. Yeah, it has to be an all paragraph, so that's fine. We can put that as an all paragraph.
We'll make sure we correct that. Thank you. Thank you, Sadia. Sorry, Luigi.
Yeah, I think that of course it is better now. At least it is clear that the known reason to believe is applied to the right individuals and at the right level, and it is not in a reverse form. So it is fine. I'm still struggling to understand why we need this here when we are in a situation where the sustainability assurance practitioner is just using the work of another practitioner, and why we need to care about looking through these assurance report we are using and going to the value chain entities and focus on relationship with the sustainability assurance practitioner. Frankly, I think that the right approach would be to rely on this report full stop without the need to consider these interest and relationship. So I'm still, it is better. It is not what I think should be.
I appreciate that, Luigi, and you know, I suppose all I would say is I don't necessarily have the same view as you, but I hope that what we have is a basis to go out to stakeholders, and stakeholders will give us their advice and their wisdom and their views, and we will be able, in finalising this, to come back to the board with something that you and I can both strongly agree on and move forward on. But you know, I appreciate that we've asked an enormous amount of the board today in terms of moving through things, but I genuinely hope it gives us a basis for, firstly, a really good and informed and active period of outreach to support the consultation, and two, it genuinely shows that IESBA is there, you know, as the underpinning in terms of ethics and independence for sustainability reporting and assurance, and I hope that this gets us to that ability to have that dialogue and that engagement. Ken, did you want to come in?
Yes, I fully endorse everything you've said, Mark. But I wanted to have maybe a quick reaction to Rich's comment relative to guidance and safeguards. Rich, the way this ought to be applied is really depending on whether you have identified an interest, relationship or relevant circumstance. And then you would have to go to the relevant section in the code, because this is about independence. So for example, if there is a financial interest, you would have to be guided by the guidance in section 510 or 5510 in part 5. Same for close business relationships, same for NAS, etc. So I don't believe we need to provide or repeat the guidance on safeguards that already sits in the different sections in the code, because they're already there.
But we can also make sure, Ken, that we're asking the question in the EM about whether or not we do need more guidance or anything else, because if we do, then obviously we can provide.
Absolutely.
Right, but Rich still wants to come in.
Yeah, so in prior discussions, when we got around to talking about safeguards, which were put in 5700, my recollection was it was a reflection of the fact that this was an unusual circumstance where we were reaching out outside the organization to an entity that wasn't a client of the sustainability assurance practitioner, in which their client had no control, and they were relying on somebody else to do the work. And that's why we use the known and reason to believe. And if you had something, then you evaluate the threats and you take into consideration whether safeguards could apply to reduce those to an acceptable level. If you look at the one that you had in business relationships, for example, there was a safeguard in there in the 5700, but if you go to the business relationship section, that safeguard's not listed in the extant code or in the part 5 piece of it. So we are going to have to address it in the EM, but I think this makes, without the safeguards, it's less workable than it was with them. Thank you.
We need to make sure that that is clear in the EM, Rich. And again, as I said to Luigi earlier, as we get that section done, we'll make sure that we have a conversation with you to ensure that that is appropriately highlighted.
Thank you. Andy.
Yeah, real quickly on the point of merging the two sections, and I certainly don't want to. I do appreciate the abhorrence of having a turnaround on this, but so maybe this is a question for Ken, because I recall other cases where if the board were to now vote to expose this, but would like these 4 paragraphs tucked into 5407, that I think we could direct that to the task force to fill in the paragraph numbers later in 5407. I mean, I personally don't think I care what paragraph numbers they are. I just think it'd be an improvement for exposure if we had it in one section. And if I'm alone or minority of this, that's just fine. But I guess my question is I appreciate that's a minuscule item to put for a turnaround, and if we could move it on without having a turnaround, then
thank you. I understand, Luigi. Sorry, Andy, but I think the challenge here is it's not a simple matter of just slotting those 4 paragraphs in under section 5407. We're going to have to couch the language to provide an appropriate introduction, etc. So that will entail some additional drafting. And at this point in the process, I'm not sure that's going to help advance the document beyond where it is today. Because at the end of the day, we're going out in consultation. And as Mark has suggested, we can very well ask for stakeholders' feedback as to whether they believe it would be clearer from the perspective to have this issue addressed in a separate section, or dealt with together with section 5407, and that's a fair question to ask.
So we'll take forward, Ken, a question to include to say, is this needed as a separate section, or could it be better incorporated within 5407? And hopefully, Andy, that will give us a basis to say, if our stakeholders come back and say absolutely this is the thing to do, then in finalising the standard, we would do that.
I think we can move paragraphs around, even if they didn't. If we don't add a new requirement, I think we were allowed to do that. So, okay, got it. Thank you. Thanks for responding.
Thank you, Andy. Sanjeev?
And one brief question. What if there is no response to the question asked in this ED? Then we'll live with wherever the paragraphs are right now. Is that right? Because,
Sanjeev, I genuinely believe that there will be no question that does not receive.
I would like to believe that
in this. And if I were a betting man, I would say now to other board members that I think we may get more interest and more engagement over this consultation than perhaps almost anything that IESBA has done before. So I genuinely don't think that there will be that risk, and certainly as a task force and a work stream, we'll be looking to board members, past, present, and future, to be emphasising the importance of responding to this consultation, because it's a new area for us. It's a really important area for us. And, it's one that we have to land right.
Well, Mark, I appreciate the work done by all of you. Absolutely great work done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sanjeev. Gabriella, I think I'm going to hand over to you now, because I think that's all of the questions dealt with on those 2 sections.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much. I appreciate that it's extremely late, too late for many considerations at this time. I think that anyway, I'd like to make 1 or 2 notes about the discussion about what is happening here today before we move to a vote. And what I'd like to note is that this was a very difficult, perhaps, but very useful discussion. The main takeaway is that I will take from this discussion is that we are really able as a board to discuss things openly and to try to get agreements. I know the flexibility of the task force and of the staff in trying to make changes and significant changes on the fly without, getting rigid and putting things on a black and white way. I'd like to thank the board members who very thoroughly went through these proposals in detail, made some detailed suggestions, were able to identify some contradictions and some loopholes and a few things that we managed to adjust here during the meeting. I also note that everybody in this meeting had the opportunity to speak. And it would be a pity if it wasn't like that at the moment where we reach the end. It's the start, but it's also the end of the first part, the first step of such an ambitious project journey, and etc. It would be regrettable if we, as a board, after everything that we have been through in this project and across the many obstacles that we faced as a board and with our stakeholders and etc., that we would not be able to land in a satisfactory, I'd say more than that, robust proposal. Finally, and before I give the floor to Ken to handle the voting session, I'd like to remind you again that this is an exposure draft. This is not the end of the story. We are not voting the final draft. We are voting something to provoke our stakeholders to come with to give us feedback, to come with the suggestions and proposals, etc. So this is the first thing that I'd like everybody to have in mind when voting. The second one is that even if this meeting that we are holding for 4 hours now has been sometimes difficult, very much discussed and etc., we are at the end discussing section 700. In an exposure draft which involves reporting, which involves assurance, which involves an incredible amount of topics and issues. So let's not lose sight of the forests just because we are concerned about the tree, if it's the case. That's what we are going to do now, is to take a vote on this part of the proposal, which is the workstream 1's proposal. And then I don't think that we will have another vote on the whole, but for certainty, maybe we should, so that we can also have in our minds that that's what we are deciding today. We are not deciding exclusively about part 700. We are deciding about an incredible amount of work, an incredible proposal in terms of robustness and difficulty in a very uncertain context. We are deciding upon a framework neutral proposal, and this is to respond to the questions about what is missing in IAASB, etc. Sometimes it's our role to take the lead and not to wait for the others to take the lead. If we have to be a little bit provocative, let's be it. And that's it. I don't want to take more of your time. I could spend a lot of time here with considerations about the lessons learned, even if before we go to the vote, but it's late. And I see that before we vote, there are still 2 board members who want to come in, and these are Luigi and Paul. And then we would stop here if possible, unless someone has something very important to say, and move to the voting session. Luigi, please.
No, I'm sorry for that. It is, in my view, pretty important. We went through the most relevant sections and we discussed a lot. So thank you for this opportunity. I had a number of comments on other matters. I will give up them. All of them but one. In the conforming amendments, we made, well, the workstream 1 made a proposal to change paragraph, sorry, I don't see the number here. Okay, paragraph 400.2. And I think that there is an unintended consequence and this is pretty important, frankly, because with this amendment, we will trigger a very significant impact on the market. And I suspect it is unintended. Where we say reference to a firm expressing an opinion on the financial statement in an audit engagement also include the context of a review engagement, we are triggering an effect on the disclosure of fee, basically, whereby in section 410.3A3 and 410.23, the term of a firm expressing an audit opinion is specifically used to apply only for audit and not for review engagement, where we speak about disclosure of fee. So I urge the workstream 1 to review this wording and to change it in order not to have this trigger effect.
Thank you, Luigi. I don't know if there are any reactions from Mark or Ken.
Do you want to take Paul's question first, and then it'll just give me a chance to look and respond to Luigi?
Sure. Paul, please.
Thank you so much. I think mine, if anything, was just a clarification that because it's been such a rich and diverse conversation, as we go into this vote, is there some level of assurance that all this kind of multi-layered context will be brought out in the EM so that we're broadening the number of voices that get to come back to us on some of these points? Or as we're voting on this, I just want clarity on what's in the EM as we're approving the content on the exposure draft. Thank you.
So Paul, just to say that everyone will see the EM in draft form and be able to input in it, and be able to help us improve it and make sure that it allows us to target that diverse range of stakeholders that you've identified are really important. So all I can say is I very much look forward to receiving your comments and your help in making it as good as it can be.
Mark, if I may just respond very quickly to Luigi's question.
Yeah.
I would recommend we take that out, that conforming amendment, just because of what Luigi has signaled as a potential unintended consequence. And the board may consider that point when it comes back post-exposure.
I'm very happy with that, Ken, and I hope, Luigi, that gives you appropriate closure on that comment.
Okay, Luigi?
Yes, sorry, problem with the mouse. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so I think that I spoke too early, but I'm not going to repeat anything. Thank you very much for this wonderful discussion and for not only for the contributions, but for the attitude, which is also to highlight in terms of being flexible, listening to the others, and being able as all to get together. So
thank you. Thank you, Gabriela. I'm just conscious there are one or two board members who are literally on the verge of leaving the call, so I will move to the voting now, if I may. Christelle, did you want to come in with a comment? Okay, well, first of all, Christian, if you take your hand down, first of all, I'm going to ask if there is any board member who's abstaining from the vote. Luigi, you're an abstention? Okay, is there, if you could take your hand down, please. Is there any board member who's voting against issuing the exposure draft? And who is voting for issuing the exposure draft? I see 15 members. I think Luigi, sorry, Laurie, are you voting for?
I am, except I'm in a car and I can't get the hand up. So can you hear me?
Yes, we've counted you. And I just want to see if Rania is here. So I see 16 board members with one abstention. I'm just wondering whether we have, we have 15, 16. Okay, we have 17 votes for and one abstention. Thank you very much, Gabriela. We have a formal approval of the exposure draft. In a moment, I will turn to Luigi for articulation of his reasons for abstention. But I will ask, first of all, Mark to advise the board on two matters. First of all, the comment period for the exposure draft. And this is the totality of the sustainability exposure draft, both workstream 1 and workstream 2 text. And secondly,
so I think,
yes.
Go on,
and
Ken,
secondly, the anticipated effective date for the final standard.
Goodness me. So firstly, we're going to go out for a 100-day comment period, reflecting the fact that it's a busy period and there are other things that are out there that we have to deal with. In terms of the effective date, obviously, we are looking to finalise the standard at the end of next year. and we'll want it to be available for those engagements. We don't want to be in a retrospective application, but nevertheless, we'll want to be encouraging that it's adopted with effect from the 2025 reporting year, which will be consistent with the way that in the way with which both the reporting and assurance frameworks will work.
Yes, and thank you very much, Mark. And what I would add is we will certainly coordinate with IAASB to make sure that our effective dates are fully aligned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, before we take any additional comments, I will turn to Luigi. Luigi, if you could share your reasons for your abstention with the board, that would be useful.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. Yeah, as I discussed many times during the last month and weeks, and as I also commented in writing many times, we are preparing here certain provisions without knowing the performance standard and without having any idea of what they would be. And therefore, anything we are writing so far about group assurance or section 5, 406 or 407 are an idea that we have about the future, about how this performance standard would be shaped, but this idea has no ground. And therefore, at the moment, I am not in a position to assert that this exposure draft, if there are no comments, would be the final pronouncement. And therefore, I prefer to abstain instead of voting against this standard.
Okay, thank you very much, Luigi.
Okay, thank you very much to all of you, especially to those for those it's very unsocial hours. Thank you for this result. Thank you for these 2 years of work to get to this result. I think that we all have reasons to celebrate tonight for those for which is still time. And I would also like to extend a very special and warm thank you to the board members who are leaving us today. This is a very special moment, the very emotional one, because we said goodbye in New York, but now it's time to say goodbye, even if until the end of the year you will be with us, and after that as well. Thank you, Jens, Yao Shu, Sanjeev, Felicia, for your amazing contribution and for your company along this journey. And we all wish you all the best for the next chapters. And I also would like to extend you a very warm holiday season's greetings. And well, for those who celebrate Christmas, Merry Christmas. Christmas, I hope that you all have the opportunity to rest and to process what we managed to achieve here today. And again, very special thank you to the task force and to the staff who allowed us to get this done today. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you soon, early next year. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Season's greetings.
Thank you very much.
Take care all. Christmas.
Goodbye.